Why does the universe create intelligence? Because it non-randomly influences the replication. Sentience has a value. What's the value? It can look ahead a little bit, and it can non-randomly influence the replication and adaptiveness of the next cycle. So this is how you can defend the idea that VIG is pretty useful. Give it the ability to learn adaptive values and test them evidence-wise. And lastly, give it governance. Do your best job at trying to constrain it within some kind of a governance system. So the people who are building this and testing it, they're all incentivized to keep publishing these open papers that show, yeah, this system is actually a little bit better. That's where open source does a much better job than the frontier labs today. Because the truth is the network is winning, man. It's the network of all the GitHub code base that's way more powerful than any of the individual actors in these frontier labs who think they're going to capture the whole light cone of future value. But no, dude, it's creative destruction. Network always wins. They're going to hold their little their frontier for a little while. They're going to have that beachhead, and then somebody's going to come along, man, with something else.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned into The Trajectory, and this is the 21st episode in our Worthy Successor series, where we talk about the kind of intelligence we would hope to populate the multiverse beyond humanity. This is thus far the only episode and the only living thinker who's tangibly improved the odds that I have in my own head that we are to land on a worthy rather than an unworthy successor. So the only person now living who's ever convinced me to be more optimistic about the likelihood of a worthy successor is a very strong compliment in my book. He has also been involved in the singularity world since the late 90s, early 2000s, was running events at Stanford in the early 2000s. Larry Page was at one of his events in 2005. They used to have hundreds of people coming in to sort of look at the future of intelligence, the process of acceleration. And this person is none other than the futurist John M. Smart. He's also the founder of the Evo-Devo Institute and a variety of other initiatives, a profound thinker who studies how does he frame it? Accelerationology versus being an accelerationist or accelerationism. Accelerationism would be let's speed up tech for its own sake. Tech always good. All power is moving in all directions. Perfectly fine. Only good things will happen. Accelerationology would be the study of how things accelerate. And in John's case, how they sustainably unfold. He's the one that, in fact, brought the word autopoiesis into my own personal vocabulary, the self-creating power, so I don't have to use Spinozan terms to talk about that particular phenomena. There is so much to discuss in this episode. It's the longest episode we've ever done in the series. There are more analogies to nature than you have ever heard in any previous Worthy Successor episode, and we go absolutely all out for 3.5 hours. And I enjoyed every minute of it. I hope you get a lot out of this episode. As you can imagine, there will be a lot to say, which I will save for the end of this episode, but I'm incredibly grateful for having John here. This is John Smart here on The Trajectory. So John, welcome to the show.
It is an honor and a pleasure, Dan, to finally be on this show. I've been listening to these amazing people that you have dragged on to talk about a tough concept, and you've got them all talking about it. And I've been in this game thinking about long-term futures and complexity and adaptiveness for a long time. AI since 2000, actually.
Yeah.
And now to see, number one, to see this crazy AI blow up, and then two, to see you rising to that challenge, and a few other people, not just you, but
totally,
saying, look, we really have to think about the long-term perspective. And as one of my grad degrees is in foresight. So, how do you look ahead, right? Number one thing.
I mean, for me, it's talking to a lot of smart people, and there's few thinkers that have influenced my thought in the last 2 years, more so than yourself. So this has been long awaited on my side as well, and cannot wait to fly in. We, other Worthy Successor episodes, sometimes we'll just get into the first question of how do we define a Worthy Successor episode. In your case, there's some foundational John Smart kind of lenses to think through. Your systems lens is extremely unique and I think very useful. So I'm going to start by unpacking some of this and having you kind of walk us through some of the grounded systems theory that you leverage to interpret where things are going and consider what could work out well. Evo-Devo's, you run the Institute of Evo-Devo, lots of interesting talks online. If you were going to kind of, I think the developmental side of this, by the way, is what's not talked about by most people. When you nutshell the concept and the approach of this specific systems theory, how do you outline it for people? Because I'm going to have people step into this pair of goggles and wear it through this episode together.
Yeah, so to discuss Evo-Devo, I think it's good for me to kind of give you my personal journey toward it.
Cool.
In '99, I sold my business and realized, hey, this is what I really want to do is I want to understand how people look to the future. What are the best lenses they use? And the most interesting question that I had was, why do things go faster every year? And Carl Sagan in Cosmos talked about that. He called that the cosmic calendar. He put all these interesting universal events on a calendar year. And you see this insane speed up the closer you get to the present, right? And he said, that's a phenomenon that science needs to better understand and model, right? And what are the implications of that, right? And what I realized in 2000 was nobody's studying that. There's no institute. There's no what I call accelerationology, right? Today is accelerationism, this blind faith in in pushing forward Western capitalist values and unrestrained AI experimentation. And you and I are both quite against that. What I was talking about was, well, what is accelerating change itself? Why does it happen? And when is it good and when is it not? When is it adaptive and when is it maladaptive? So we started this institute called the Acceleration Studies Foundation. We had these 3 big conferences at Stanford with a lot of really interesting people from tech and from academics and systems theory, evolutionary biology. And we asked these questions. We started asking those questions. And what that led me to was the centrality. It led me to 2 interesting ideas. The first was what I call inner space. All the interesting things in the universe, the most complex things, they get more local and they get more virtual. And so, they're physical systems, but they're encoding knowledge, right? Any replicator is encoding knowledge, coding a model of the world, whether it's a bacterium, whether it's us, right? Whether it's an LLM. And it's densifying. It's figuring out ways to take its critical metabolic and sentience systems and get them closer together in space, time, energy, and matter relative to any computation, right? So the efficiency and density of computation just keeps going up. And around that time, a few people started really asking, well, what's the future of that? This, where can that end up? And Seth Lloyd published this pretty courageous paper in 2000, The Ultimate Physical Limits of Computation. And he came to this conclusion that things get more and more like what we call computronium, right? Where you reorganize things for computation, you get them really close together.
Is that his term?
No.
I was going to say, I was like, I didn't know he came up with that one.
That's a transhumanist term, but he's the one who showed us what the limit was. I think it's called the Lloyd-Margolis limit. If you want to increase the speed of time at which you can flip a bit, you increase the amount of energy. There's a maximum energy you can apply to flip a bit in the shortest time, and that is on the surface of a black hole. So basically, he was arguing that everything is kind of trending towards this compression, right? And this efficiency and compression. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Who else is talking about that? And that's how I came across Lee Smolin's idea that the universe itself may be a replicator via black holes. Every Big Bang comes from a previous black hole leading to another universe in the multiverse. So that was the first model that was proposed of some kind of a natural selection of universes. that's not wasteful, like say many worlds theory, where any single quantum event creates a zillion worlds. It's much more like biology, where there's a trade-off in replication and the adaptive value of the organism that emerges, right? So a lot of people talk about that trade-off in biological systems, and Smallman was the first to kind of bring that idea into cosmology. And it's one of the, I'd say, 6 topics in our Evo-Devo Institute that we are continuing to just, like a dog with a bone. We just keep
chipping away on that one.
Chipping on that way. And we're doing a conference hopefully next year where we're getting the latest people who have been writing about that. If you're curious, go to the Autodidactic Universe by those of you who are listening in or watching. By Stefan Alexander at Brown University. He wrote this wonderful archive paper on the universe as a possible learning system, and then he showed how neural network models actually can be applied in that concept of the fundamental parameters being like genes that unfold a universe that then is a learning system. Why does the universe create intelligence? Because it non-randomly influences the replication. So what we just introduced is this idea that sentience has a value. What's the value? It can look ahead a little bit, and it can non-randomly influence the replication and adaptiveness of the next cycle. That's why
absolutely.
That's what we do with our kids. That's what we do with our LLMs, which are our kids. We're continually like, oh, it worked here, didn't work here. Let's tweak it a little bit. Right? We're not godlike, none of us. We're all computationally incomplete, as Wolfram would say. We can only see a little ways down, but there is value in intelligence. And so this starts to help you understand, I think, why a lot of people think that, intelligence is one of the conserved quantities in a universe, right? It helps you understand all the people who argue that. What that led me to...
Talk to us about intelligence as a conserved quantity for a second, because actually that's the first time that's ever come up on this show. I mean, the idea that there's only a certain amount of matter or energy, okay, everybody knows that. But, or everybody's heard some gist similar to that, right? You can't destroy or whatever. But talk to us about the intelligence one. You were going to lead somewhere with that.
There's many ways we can describe it. I'd say the simplest way, we should probably go at this point to Evo-Devo, because the simplest way of really thinking about why intelligence is always a covariant, or it's always co-associated with adaptiveness or with persistence. Why are all persistent systems encoding systems that model self and environment, right? And for us, self, other, and environment, right? Why do they all do that to persist? Well, there's this wonderful concept that it's called competitive exclusion. So in all these interesting environments where you have space, time, energy, and matter resources, right? STEM resources, right? Space, time, and energy and matter. And you're using them to create information, that you use and that is in your environment, and computation, right? You're doing some interesting computation there, hopefully involving survival or involving what's called niche construction, where you use your intelligence to modify your niche, which modifies the entire selection environment. As we just described all the traps of niche of hyper capitalist niche construction, where now we have all these addictive traps that we didn't have prior to the web, right? Yeah, we have all these cool new things, but we have all these weird, bad, you were talking recently about, gambling, internet gambling, porn, all the problems with screens for kids. There's so many there's so many problematic traps that get created. But at the same time, we get these superpowers with the niche, right? And one of them, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit later, this is going to be toward the end of our conversation, is stuff like this. This is Richard Witt's book, Reweaving the Web. He's an ex-Google lawyer, and he parachuted out and wrote this pretty crazy optimistic vision of highly decentralized AI, personal AI that we all might have within the next 10 years. And this vision is really about sentience expansion for individuals, right? Serious niche construction where you are actually a cognitive prosthesis is always working with
Absolutely.
you, filtering the world for you, either in good or bad ways, or more accurately, both. And so you're going to see people go into the filter bubbles, and you're going to see people going into, oh no, I want to use this for evidence-based nudging to make myself, smarter, better politician, better manager, better marketer, better scientist. And you're going to watch. You're going to see the people that can credibilize themselves and the people that wallify themselves with these personal AIs.
World eater, lotus eater stuff.
Yeah, there it is. It's going to happen. Yeah. And, you were describing on one of your previous podcasts, the flirtation with idiocracy that we're seeing in America because of these traps. And, societies do this too. Some societies are going to flirt too far with these lotus eater stuff.
Yeah.
And they're going to become irrelevant to the leading edge of the network. And other societies are going to craft that stuff to maximize individual freedom, individual agency, collective intelligence, general adaptiveness, evidence-based behavior. And you're going to watch those guys flourish, and they're going to kind of lead the future. And everybody else is going to be like, okay, I have to follow what they say now.
Absolutely. Well, adaptiveness being, there's a lot of, we could say, continua that people can land on when new technologies arise. I think the most important one is, are you becoming vastly more or vastly less adaptive? That's the main continua. The other ones are they're sideshows. So
I agree with you 100%. And I like to split adaptiveness in two ways. First, I split it functionally into persistence and sentience.
Okay, go on.
Obviously, everybody likes to say, persistence is, the fundamental goal of all life, right? Survival. But we just argued, no, there's this additional goal of modeling yourself, others, and the environment.
Yeah.
And that is really always core to not just adaptiveness, to a special kind of adaptiveness we call general adaptiveness. We're not talking about now a fish that goes into a cave and loses its eyes, or a remora that loses its locomotion, or a parasite. That's specific adaptiveness. No, we're talking about general adaptiveness. The ability to niche construct in any environment, in any context, and say, I'm living in this crazy extremophile. I'm going to create this nice little niche. I'm going to be a bacterium, and I'm going to figure out how to take a toxin, all these pollutants, like chlorinated biphenyls, and these bacteria that have figured out how to take it apart and use it for energy. What an insane adaptive capability. And you know what? This guy here, Andreas Wagner, in Arrival of the Fittest, right? His subtitle is How Nature Innovates. He says the only reason bacteria can do that, why they're so incredibly persistent across all these niches with all of these energy sources, they can use like 150 different energy sources, as he describes. And we can use like a tiny fraction of those. So how can they do that? Because they're one single system, man. They use horizontal gene transfer and these tiny little tubes.
Proboscis.
Which they send out. So they share all the genes with each other. Say, hey, I don't know if this is going to work. You try this, you try this, you try this. And then you get this subset that can do the incredible thing. And why does it do that? Because not just because it has persistence, it has a sentience. It has an ability to model all the possible three-dimensional molecular changes that it might exploit, and then a subset of those find that little portal through to greater power, greater persistence, and as I would argue, for the whole network, not that individual one, the whole network, greater sentience, right? And a great example of that. I just lost the thread. It's the same thing in humans. Anyway, it'll come up later.
Well, I'm sure it will. Let's pulse on what you're talking about for sentience. So you're referring to. So I think there are. Let me put on the table two ideas, and I know which one we're talking about. So you're talking about the conscious process as modeling of world, of self, of other, being sort of what an agent would do if it would like to continue to persist in very complex environments. That's clear. There's also the idea of qualia. In other words, when you eat ice cream, or if you get stabbed in, you kick the bottom of your chair accidentally or something, you can have kind of negative or positive valence. I'm seeing sights in my head. I have a field of awareness where different sorts of senses are entering. There's kind of a qualia. Do you associate that with being kind of a different thing than the sort of sentience you were talking about that might be shared across a trillion bacterium?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So you get right to obviously the foundational question here. What is consciousness? And I think we can obviously say that it's a continuum. We can obviously say something like information integrated theory, wave our hands, right? Everyone's fighting over what that means, is part of it. Integration is a key part of it. The term binding is constantly used in consciousness study. Consciousness is the system that binds all these arguing mindsets. As one of my mentors, William Calvin, said, right? There's this evolutionary computation amongst all these thoughts, right? And there's this system that's watching them all fight. And it's not only watching them fight, it's watching itself. As Blaise Arcus said on your previous, one of the cleanest first step definitions of consciousness is a recursive system that can model itself as well as model itself modeling other systems, right? So there's a recursive step. But then there's something like this Stanislaw Dehaene's global workspace theory there too. There's some kind of an attention mechanism. And this is what made LLMs, one of the things that made LLMs blow up. We're going to talk about natural alignment soon. What are the features of nature that we're borrowing and putting into these new substrate? And one of them, the Transformer 2017, Google is a primitive attention mechanism, a primitive global workspace where the system learns how to look down various trees, probability trees, and then it picks, based on current context, which of those it wants to search the furthest down based on its reward structure and what it's learned so far and what it's thinking at that moment. And that's what consciousness does. Consciousness takes a whole bunch of unique perspectives, binds them, integrates them into this meta layer. And I've said for the longest time, I think emotion is a primitive form of consciousness. Because if you read our friend Antonio Damasio's great book, Descartes' Error, from like the early 2000s, the neuroscientist, he said, look at these people with bilateral lesions to their amygdala. They don't have access to their gut instinct because both of the amygdala are gone on both sides, right? Amygdalectomies, right? So what do? They're like these hyper-rationalists that can just argue forever. Oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this, but they can't make a decision. So what do you use emotion for? Two things. You use it to motivate you, as you were saying, toward or away, right? All the complex pleasure-pain bit strings, which are in the basic bacteria, right? I'm going to move toward or I'm going to move away from something with these chemical computations. They don't even have neurons, but they have that pleasure-pain dynamic, right? Either move toward or away from the thing, the food source or the toxin.
Yes.
So they compute that.
Toward or away.
They compute that.
Yeah, they compute it.
And so what do? We compute it using these special neurotransmitters that are a statistical state summary of some kind. They're like a blanket that just kind of goes out and pushes they listen to the whole system and they push it. They integrate it toward, this is what you're going to do. You're going to move toward, or no, I don't like my little spidey hairs are back on are going up on the back of my head. I can't even tell you what it is about what you just said that doesn't feel right. But dude, I'm backing away. And so that's the second thing that it does is it resolves logical log jams, which will always exist till the end of the heat death of the universe because nothing is ever godlike. So all the AIs are going to keep fighting with each other with these incomplete models that are not, many of them are not groundable. They are empirically built models, right? Almost all the models that we have are inductive, not deductive.
Yep.
So you've got this set of models, you're trying to see the future, you go a little further away, a little ways out, and it turns into this like haze. What do? You do this state summary, this network state summary, and then you make a gut decision and you act. And you know what? If you didn't do that, you'd be like that person who's constantly analysis paralysis and they can't make a choice and someone else just takes their resources away because they managed to do an integration, right? And the integration allows them the best possible inductive guess. And so emotion, cognition, higher consciousness seem to be global workspace, right? So-called working memory, attention. These all seem to be very important algorithms that sit on top. And we're just now beginning to build those into our LLMs, which is one of the reasons they are so powerful.
So I'm glad we got to poke into a little bit of what we're meaning by consciousness. There's kind of this function, and then there's the qualia. And of course, this is starting to manifest itself in the tech. I want to make sure we touch on Evo-Devo as you had just mentioned there.
Before we do, I'm gonna throw out one I'm a systems theorist, right? So I need a disclaimer, right? Systems theory is a subset of philosophy that's trying to become validated science. So what I'm just saying here is a story. It's philosophy. It's a special kind of story that hopes to become validated or falsified. And of course, only pieces of my story are going to be, if I'm lucky, going to be validated. But ideally, it's not even wrong. Is that famous dissing of that scientist? I forget who guy who said this. Hopefully, it's at least wrong enough to take us one next step. Oh, less wrong. Let's use the less wrong term. Hopefully, it's less wrong, and we're continuing to step in the right direction.
That's all we can hope for.
Yeah, and so I tend to feel that this concept of consciousness. This is my story I'm going to tell you here. I buy the Copenhagen interpretation that you cannot separate the observer and the observed in quantum mechanics, in quantum field theory. You can't separate them. Is that the observer affects the observed depending on how they observe, right? And now we're talking about elemental quantum interactions here. And I can show you in every level of complexity, observer and observed inseparability. The observer is modifying, niche constructing the observed. We just discussed that. The observer is not just a separate observer, but as Andy Clark says, all minds are extended minds and embedded minds, right? In the Experience Machine, his latest book, right? This is the extended mind thesis. Chalmers and Clark are the two that invented or popularized the extended mind thesis, that we're in our niche constructed environment as well as we are in the physical environment. And what I'm going to tell you about development is when you think about it, it's going to blow your mind that how can a single fertilized egg that you cannot even see make you and I? To me, that is the most, ask any futurist, ask any complexity theorist, what is the most amazing thing you know of in the physical universe? To me, that's it. There's so much compressed information in the developmental genes of that egg. You think, oh yeah, the brain is awesome. Guess what? The brain is just a subset of that thing
packed in there.
Unfolding. And you say, well, how to do that? Well, obviously, it doesn't have a blueprint. There's not enough specification. So where is most of the information that it's using? In the environment in which it is embedded in and extended into. Through many previous cyclings, those genes have tuned up to flow all that information in at the right time, in the right sequences, and build this amazing thing. Holy crap. That shows you the power, right, of both. It shows you, number one, that the observer and the observed cannot be separated. There's always a blurry boundary there, right? But it also shows you, I would argue, and this is where I'm going to wave my hands, that qualia are kind of built in at all levels of the continuum. Not only do you and I have a continuum of consciousness, like when we're sleeping or when we're, under anesthesia, or when I got my head whacked by a soccer ball and I was out for 15 minutes and I woke up and what? Where was I? Dude, I was nowhere. I had no EEG probably. Or those poor guys that drown in super cold water and 40 minutes later they come up, they had flatline EEG.
Yeah.
Where were they? Dude, they were in a state of suspended animation, this third state between life and non-life, right?
Yeah.
So I feel there is this clean continuum for consciousness, not just in individuals where there's this wave, like sleep, wake, but across all these species. So that is a panpsychist. Let's put triple quotes around that so we don't offend the hardcore scientists. But there is this panpsychist feature. This science fiction writer that I really liked when I was in high school, A. Van Vogt, he called it the A-Force, Adela Dicknander. He's basically talking about in the future, this one guy's talking to this other person and saying, of course electrons have a psychology. And it sure took us a long time to figure it out. And then when I heard that, and then when I heard this other quote by Tim Ferriss, the great astronomy writer, this is a different Ferriss, with just
I don't know that Tim Ferriss.
Okay, yeah. So he wrote
when you see the great Tim Ferriss on a podcast.
Yeah, well, this is great. Okay, so this is great Tim Ferriss from the 2000s, right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what he wrote this Coming of Age in the Milky Way, beautiful book about like astronomy, past and future, right? And he basically said, number one, we have to recognize the biggest problem with science today is we have no Einstein of information theory. We have an Einstein of physics, but not of information. We don't understand information. We don't understand mind. We don't understand how information has a causal effect on mind. But someone's going to figure it out. And he's waving his hands and he's like saying, it's going to happen. It's going to be probably one of the big research agendas of the 21st century. And I read that and I go, yes, right? That totally fits for me with this idea that, consciousness is this modeling. Adela Dignander for Van Vogt was what he called the modeling tendency. All life has this tendency
to model.
But this is the most important thing. Only persistent life has that tendency. So persistent life eats all the other life that doesn't model. Now, the best example of this that I know is Cairn Smith. The great origin of life theorist, British origin of life theorist, AG, I forget what his first name is, but his last name is a hyphenation of CAIRNS Smith. And he wrote this wonderful paper you can find online called Genetic Takeover. And this is back when people were arguing, where is the origin of life? Why is it so hard to find the precursors? And he was one of the people who said, well, you can't find them because life just ate up all that stuff. Life just took over, genetic takeover. Well, once life emerged, it just colonized all the spaces.
It wins.
Yeah. And so
people like to pretend like colonization was invented in 1520 or something, right? It's like brother man, like this be what's going on.
Yeah.
So your suspicion is on some level, sentience and consciousness as a even qualia as a continuum, in my opinion, is rather plausible. I've talked to some people that don't hold that view. I've found their arguments wanting.
Right.
Most people would say, a human, a lemur, a flatworm, and then where's the cutoff, whatever. But what you seem to be saying is, the single cell and maybe the stuff before the single cell, and maybe you're even saying the individual proton at some absolutely infinitesimal, like how far down.
That's exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's these theories in quantum gravity that try and argue how quantum events create a universe, and also that's quantum information theory and quantum physics, quantum cosmology, excuse me. But they're also trying to unify the unpredictable and the predictable types of physics, right? Quantum mechanics and relativity being the two most fundamental. But then you have also on the unpredictable side, you have chaos, you have non-equilibrium thermal, right? Unpredictable, contingent, creating all kinds of variety. And then on the other side, you have all these convergence physics like relativity, classical thermodynamics, right? Heat death of the universe, nuclear decay, and many other like ideal laws of gases, right? And so you end up having these two types of physics where you can make a prediction, a general system, often a global and long-term prediction about predictability, right? Where the system is converging to a predictable future, right? I can tell you the motion of the planets out to 100,000 years, right?
Yep.
I can't tell you jack about what the quantum, dynamics are going to be of the, arguing systems, right? The chemical systems that are arguing in my own head. They may not be quantum systems, they might just be classical systems, right? Mesoscopic classical systems. And yet still they have all this crazy unpredictability because we're a far from equilibrium system, right? Like Prigogine said, we're like a tornado, like a dissipative structure that just sits, sucks in energy and throws it out and throws out action and throws out intention. And dude, does it become, look at the tree of life, right? Just more and more varieties, more and more branches on the tree. We had famous people like Stephen Jay Gould, structural evolutionary theory, saying you can't tell, for evolutionary processes, all you can say is there's more branches on the tree. You can't say where any one thing is going to go. And that was a beautiful way of looking at evolutionary processes until Evo-Devo came out in the 90s. And now we can talk about that. What's Evo-Devo?
Yes, let us. We'd love to know the origin. Yeah. And then I can't wait to get into the balance of that yin and yang. It's so crucial and fascinating. Right. And one thing that I've seen a bunch of times in your slides, and I can't wait to go more into it, is you talked about evolutionary having these kind of power law sort of pop-off type graphs, and then the more normal Gaussian kind of distribution among the developmental. Can't wait to unpack it. So give us the origin, lay out the concepts. Sure. This is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah.
So basically in the 90s, so, set the stage in the late 20th century, you were finally seeing cracks in called the modern synthesis of evolution, that, everything's random. There's just kind of these random mutations that are that occasionally happen. And there's random shuffling, of chromosomes at this reproduction. And you've got basically these random walks. It was called neutral theory. Mutu Kimura from Japan was one of the lead proponents of this idea that, you just can't say where it's going to go. It's just going to do this random walk. Evolutionary dynamics are going to create this random walk, and then something interesting will pop up in these local environments. And so all you get is more diversity over time, right? Well, starting in the 90s, we started getting molecular kind of approaches to genetics, right? And people started coming forward, the developmental biologists who've been quiet for the longest time while all this evolutionary theory was going, because, dude, it's so hard to model development compared to population genetics, right? So you had all these guys like Sewell Wright and the great fly geneticist, his name starts with an M, I'm forgetting at the moment, who'd done all this wonderful work on genetic assortment in populations, and it's all based on all of these random models, which is a good first approximation. Though, right? And so
we got to get less wrong and less wrong. There you go. Less wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then these people started coming out and saying, well, wait a minute, look at development as a process. That's when all the homeobox genes and the homeodomains with and the proteins that are specified by the homeobox genes. Homeobox is this like 180 base pair sequence on one of the chromosomes that determines your body plan. And that thing is linearly, like, the anterior creates the head of the organism, the posterior of the chromosome creates the posterior, and it's also time-dependent linearization in terms of when the promoters come off and when the genes are expressed, right? It's this crazy, predictable, cycling thing. And you say, well, how does that work? And you look at it a little closer and you say, all right, that can't be controlling things at the molecular scale. Remember, we're sucking in all this environmental information, metastable information from previous cycles. So what's it really doing? It's creating a cage, a constraint cage, a network cage that guides that system very predictably under lots of chaotic development environments to these far future predictable emergent orders, right? Emergent hierarchy, emergent modularity, emergent cycling, right? And you say, well, how does it do that? Well, it does it because it has these conserved genes which don't change over macroevolutionary history. All you do is add to them. So the conserved homeobox genes that you and I have, or that the fly has, we've just added a few more accretively to it under selection. And those genes are the cat herders. Those genes are the ones that make two identical twins look the same from across the room. Two genetically identical twins, right? And then you look at them up close. And then you say, well, could their psychological properties also be predictable? Oh yeah. If you separate them at birth, they're 65% correlated on major psychological variables. right? They both buy that crazy red swing or the big truck or some other freaky things. If you look at this, if you look at the twin studies,
the studies are insane.
Yeah.
I am a twin.
There
I've
you
never
go.
been studied, but I'm interested in twin studies. And yeah, some of that stuff is like they both have a mustache and they're a firefighter and their wife's name is Susan. Like stuff that's just ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Right?
But then you look at the twins that are raised together and they're like less than half, like 45% correlated. You say, well, why is that? And then you start thinking, well, because there's all these genes that aren't designed to conserve. They're designed to vary creatively and create innovation, create new potentia, right? And so we all have this individuation value that's built into us from those evolutionary innovation genes, right? And the girl growing up who sees her identical twin, sharing the bedroom or whatever they're doing, I'm not going to be like her. I'm going to differentiate. I'm going to make a different choice. I like
sports. I don't like being a ballerina, right? Because you need to be different. Yeah.
And so this is really, so you look at these identical twins up close, where it counts, where the rubber meets the road, how they were built. Everything about them is structurally and functionally different. But you got to go real up close to see how different. If you're not close enough, you see the same Brodmann areas in the brain, the same general organ structure. Go a little closer and say, well, how did those neurons get wired up? What's the organ microstructure in the kidney, right? And what's the fingerprints? What's the retinal prints? All different, all chaotically different because the molecules are doing their little competitive and cooperative exploration of the phase space, and they're constrained by those cat herder genes, by the developmental genes, right? The Hox genes and the regulators and all the developmental regulatory systems on top of that, right? Which is incredibly complex sets of networks. They include not just genetics, but epigenetics. They include microRNA, all these cell signaling molecules like Hox and Hedgehog and Sonic. There's all these just incredible features at multiple scales that are cat herding. And like I said, the second most amazing thing to me, besides development itself, is that it's so predictable. That blows me away. How can a system so complex, starting with such compressed information, hit so many of those future targets? Those are insanely far in the future from the perspective of those molecules. They're operating at peak, they're operating nanosecond scales. How the crap can that happen? Because of that incredible past history of what has often been called self-organization, right? Or cyclic selection. And this allows us to get to a simplification of Evo and Devo. So the Evo-Devo, before we say this word though, the Evo and Devo model that came out in the 90s was, look, development is a separate thing. It has these highly conserved genes, and there's a subset of genes that explore the phase space. Let's call them the evolutionary genes, ARY. And so now evolutionary development, random exploration, combined with predictable futures, right? Unpredictable futures and predictable futures. Those two together, that's what evolution is. Evolution, really, to understand it, is evolutionary development. And as I wrote this paper that I wrote, if you look at any random sample of the process, I would argue it's 95%, it looks like it's evolutionary search. It looks random. It looks like it's just exploring in ways you can't predict. And that's why the random walk and the random models are so useful as first approximations.
Like, yeah. Yep.
They're so
Seems
useful.
Like it's good enough.
They're so useful, right? You can say, oh, you can't predict what he's going to think next. A random model is going to fit really well. A Monte Carlo model is going to get you this great first approximation. But remember, there's this 5% of the genes in our bodies, in all metazoan bodies, 3 to 5%, that are deeply conserved across macroevolutionary history. More importantly, you try and mess with any one of those genes, that system won't develop. They're brittle. Not only are they highly conserved, you cannot mess with them. All they can do is add little bits to them as they get more complex, so that 40, 50% of the roundworm's developmental genes are the ones we have, and we just add this other set right on top.
It's wild.
It's so wild. So you have these two fundamental dynamics, right? One is, I'm putting my hands here for the listeners. One is like my left hand, which is like everything is exploring, going out. And my other is is my right hand, and all the fingers are going into the palm. All the roads are leading to Rome, right?
Yes,
No matter what you feed these kids, they're all going to turn into these,
Yeah, they don't grow a third arm out of their head if you feed them some weird food, right?
No. And the other cool thing about this is there's two ways to see predictability. You can see predictability if you've seen a previous cycle of that class of replicator. You've seen one frog go from an egg to a frog. Oh man, I can tell you a lot about what that next egg's going to do. Or the other way, one we all really would like, is you have the math and models. You actually have the math and models for the development. We have that for fish and yeast, right? We can tell you all the genetic networks that predictably allow fish yeast to divide into two, right? We have that for the first 30 days of the sea urchin's development. That's probably the most complex one that I know. And that was Eric Davidson at Caltech. He spent his entire career looking at sea urchins, which is one of the model organisms the developmental geneticists study. And he can tell you which genes are going to turn on and which proteins they're going to regulate, and how that creates the form of the sea urchin for the first 30 days.
So he can run the math on.
He can run the simulation.
Look at the DNA and be like, what's it going to look like?
Yes, he can run the simulation in fast space in computers and encapsulate all of those critical developmental processes. And that's a test.
That's crazy.
But it's also rare. It's a rare thing today with our primitive computation and with the tiny amount of money that our governments spend on things like developmental.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that kind of stuff.
That feels like some kind of Newtonian level breakthrough stuff, right? Because we're talking about literally like unpack. Like again, you were saying where is Mars going to be in the year 100,022? It's like we can figure out pretty much where Mars is going to be on the money.
Exactly.
But what's the fruit fly going to do in the next 5 minutes?
Yes.
Nothing. Yes. And that's insane, by the way.
It's insane. It is.
And so the fact that some of the complexity that's packed in those early systems can be predictively used. I mean, Michael Levin uses the analogy of, if I have some theory of biology, I should be able to kind of like assemble things in such a way where it does what I think it does.
He's so awesome. Yeah, he's
Levin's the man.
He's the man. He's the modern version of he and Ed Boyd are both the modern version of Dick Feynman's blackboard admonishment that they found when he died. Right?
I don't know it. Yes.
Build it. I don't understand it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the true test. When you can build the thing that you're trying to understand, then you really understand it, right?
Yeah.
And they're both just charging ahead on doing that in different domains. Yeah.
I'm glad people are. I mean, so to get into this developmental thing, and we're going to get into those power law versus the Gaussian thing. Like I want to touch on that as well. But to get into the developmental thing, what I'm still grappling with, and I think will be interesting for the listeners here, is this sort of this countervailing force to the just wild evolutionary splay and spray that seems to kind of bound things.
Yes.
It's fascinating because one wonders, well, how did those bounds even show up? In other words, were they randomly walked into?
I'm going to give you an example from accelerating change. This is where we get back to my early stuff. Okay. So this is where we get to use the term autopoiesis, right? So autopoiesis is a term from the 70s systems theory community. Metrel and Varana popularized it. A little bit squishy term. It's less precise than Evo-Devo because you can't focus in on the genetics the way you can with Evo-Devo, right? And then all the philosophy that people build on top of that, these two opposing systems. With autopoiesis, it's this idea that everything interesting in the universe is a self-replicating, creative, self-maintaining system, right? You got to have all three of those properties, right? And so you look at, say, replicating suns, the three generations of suns in the early universe that built out the periodic table. Those are autopoietic systems, right? They used universe stuff to very efficiently outcompete any other use of that primitive star stuff when it comes together gravitationally. They build stars and they build planets inside of galaxies, and they do it very efficiently. And then you look at all these models of origin of life, once you get sufficiently complex metal-rich planets, you get guys like Nick Lane and others talking about the geothermal vents as this unique environment where you have high energy throughput and chemical complexity and microcompartments in the structures of the vents, these volcanic rift areas underneath the ocean, right? And that's where we find archaea, right? The oldest the oldest life that's chemosynthetic, doesn't even need photosynthesis, dude. This is the simplest thing, the simplest replicator that is a cell. You say, well, what does it do? How does it do that? Well, it does it because it has these, back to Andreas Wagner again, right? Rival of the fittest. It has these three kind of super cool things. It has this stable chemical replicator called the citric acid cycle, right? Or tricarboxylic acid cycle. And this is Stuart Kauffman in At Home in the Universe. It was one of the first people to describe these autocatalytic sets, these replicators that create the next thing in the cycle. And you got these 8 or 10 chemicals that all just make more copies of the next one in the cycle. And then it's this closed loop. And as long as the chemicals are there, that thing's going to replicate. It's going to outcompete all of the uses of those molecules. Well, that's nice. That's very stable, predictable. Call that developmental. But it doesn't encode much more information than its own persistence. It's not modeling the outside world. Now put it together with RNA, which is a special molecule that can be an enzyme and it can be a information encoder, right? It can get together with transfer RNA and create proteins based on the codes in that crystal, in that aperiodic system, right? And so, but that doesn't really take off until you have a third thing, which is a membrane, which is another replicator, right? These protenoid microspheres that we see, these lipid bilayers in those primitive environments, they replicate too, like a soap bubble. So you got 3 replicators. One of them can encode all this incredible innovation capacity. Let's call that the evolutionary side. That's the nucleic acid. One of them can create this stable energetic system. That's the metabolism, the TCA cycle. And then the third is this boundary that keeps it persistent, keeps out all the bad things, keeps all the good things in close to each other. Remember my locality idea? Yeah, if you can localize in space, time, and with energy and matter, your information and your computation, that system is going to outcompete any other system. It's just going to blow up with all these different forms. And some of those are going to end up being more adaptive. So to me, Evo-Devo, that concept helps us understand that evolutionary innovation is as fundamental as developmental conservation. I like to call the telos, the entrained goal of a replicator, of any autopoietic replicator. There's at least 2 fundamental things, and then there's a third thing that's a fusion of them. So the 2 fundamentals are evolutionary exploration or innovation or divergence, right? Experimentation, creation, generativity, and then protection and prediction. That system has to be able to protect a cycle. And that's the D word. That's your development. That's your predictable side. So you've got So in information theory, in the future of information theory, this is where I would argue the Einstein of information theory is eventually going to come. We're going to see that evolutionary processes create novel information constantly in unpredictable ways. Constant new potentia are bubbling up in Spinoza's terms. Developmental systems are constantly protecting old information. And you can't define old information except in relation to the entire life cycle. You have to see the whole life cycle of the replicator, whatever it is, whether it's a sun, whether it's a chemical system, whether it's a technical system. You have to see the whole thing and say, oh no, that's just revisiting state spaces that all the previous ones did. And it's very nicely, developmentalists call it canalized. It's got this nice deep valley that's just keeping the system in that loop. And it's very robust to trying to mess with it. As Levin likes to say, you smush up the eyes of a developing embryo blows your mind that it just fixes itself. The cell-cell communication just fixes it. You take a virus, you chop it up in a petri dish, the thing self-assembles again. You say, what? That's not even a living thing. But remember, it's an autopoietic thing. It's a replicator dependent upon cells in this case, so it's facilitated autopoiesis, but it has encoded so much, let's call it robust intelligence, right? Or resilient, if you want to use that word. It's so resilient to chaos that it's just going to find those local minima again, just like protein folding will, right? All the protein folding, like we saw, DeepMind working out recently, right? That's all energy minimization that's very predictable and very robust. So there's billions of ways that thing could fold, but it always folds into these particular things in aqueous structure. That's the D word, my friend. That's development. That's development at the, at the molecular scale. And we can see those two at all levels. We can see the unpredictable and the predictable. And then what I would argue is the synthesis of those two. That's what the Evo-Devo biologists are trying to say is, well, life has to use those two processes, the unpredictable regulation and creation of innovation with the predictable conservation of the cycle. And so that's adaptation, my friend. Adaptation is a predictable and unpredictable mix always. And I would argue it's mostly unpredictable, right? On a first sample, it looks random. You can't see those hidden those hidden potesta. You can't see the conservation unless you either follow a bunch of cycles and then try and generalize, or you're looking and modeling really carefully. And I can give you great examples of both. Let me just give you a couple on both sides. So on the innovation side, I gave you the horizontal gene transfer one.
Yes.
Do you know how many other forms of genetic innovation there are? It's insane. You had Blaise Arquez on, and he said this wonderful phrase that DNA is the most persistent molecule in the known universe. That's awesome, and he's totally right. Not just is it persistent, it has the most evolutionary innovation. It can create. It could be RNA, it can be DNA, it can be tRNA, it can be miRNA, it can be viruses that jump out of the body and infect you. And many people have argued that's as fundamentally important. Oh, and it can create sexual recombination. Many people have argued that viral infection in humans is even more important for our evolutionary history, or at least at the same level. Carl Zimmer talks about it in Planet of Viruses. If you read that book. It's possibly at least as important because at least 8% of our own genome is previous viruses having sex with us and inserting new genes. And so this helps you understand people like Paul Ewald in the Evolution of Infectious Disease who say, yeah, maybe metazoans like us could become immune to viruses and bacteria, but hey, maybe it's actually useful for them to be able to infect us. There's something called the syncytiotrophoblast, which is a human endogenous retrovirus that we need for fusion of the placenta in the development of early embryos that a virus gave us. Without that, we wouldn't be able to have gestation the way we currently have it. So much stuff is constantly being thrown in, and none of this is mutation, my friend. Mutation is probably a tiny fraction of all the ways we do this walk. So my argument, and this is James Shapiro and Dennis Noble. Go to those two people, any of those two, and you'll see they're arguing. Oh, and Andreas Wagner, who I keep waving. And you will see people saying, no, these tools, these cassettes for evolutionary exploration, they're really deep. And it was Shapiro who I think might have been one of the first ones to say, to argue that, or maybe it was not him, but he popularized it. I read him popularizing it. Bacteria under stress, they shift into a low fidelity mode of replication. They have two modes of making copies of themselves, and one of them is super lossy and random. And this is not like X rays coming in or gamma rays, none of that bullshit. Sorry. I don't want to offend the people who worked out that is an important concept, because it is.
Yeah.
But really, this is directed and sentience directed, because they're actually saying, oh my gosh, at some level, they're understanding they're under threat. Or they've got all these feedback mechanisms encoded. Maybe they're not understanding it. Only the network is understanding it.
Yes.
But then they suddenly go to this low fidelity mode and they make these crazy new varieties of themselves. And that's one of the ways they survive, besides the gene swapping that I was describing. So that's an example of all of these things that were new biologists. This is called the ESS, the Extended Evolutionary Synthesis. So Evo-Devo was one of the components of the ESS that we're trying to build on top of, wonderful base level Darwinian thinking. But so that's just on the evolutionary side. What about on the development side? On the development side, we got people like this guy, Eric Kirschenbaum, in his book, The Zoologist's Guide to the Galaxy. And he's basically siding with that subset of astrobiologists who are trying to argue over how universal is our type of life on other Earth-likes. What an awesome concept, right? What an awesome thing to sink your teeth into. How much will the life on these other planets be like ours? And of course, he's arguing, Kirschenbaum, look at some of his podcasts, he's arguing that a lot of the particulars, evolutionary particulars, are going to be unpredictably different, but body plans are going to be the same. Types of organisms, types of functions are going to be the same. You're going to have the streamlined fish fins, you're going to have wings, you're going to have these prehensility, you're going to have these opposability, the ability to manipulate tech, all that stuff, man. Science, math, computers, all that stuff has got to pop out because it's so useful in its niche. For persistence and sentience, right? And more specifically, it's useful for all four things: creation or innovation, protection or development, right? And persistence and sentience. So I call that the CAPS model because you can say protection is accountability. So creativity, accountability, persistence, sentience, right? Put your thinking cap on. And so those four things, I think, are really, you can pull those telos out of a developmental system. And I should say one last thing about those developmental portals, right?
Go for it.
People didn't,
I'm going to go really hard on those in a second, but yes,
people
did
not think that they existed in the mid 20th century. And then people started arguing, wait a minute, there's all of this predictability in development. Could be this macro historical predictability too.
What are the things that got them to think about it? Like, what are the
convergent
things
evolution? Convergent evolution. That was the number one thing. Yeah.
So this is like so many crabs, so many snakes, so many.
Yes.
Okay.
And now we have the molecular genetics of, let's say, antifreeze proteins in fish. Turns out there's these two fish. There's polar fish and there's there's Arctic and Antarctic polar fish, right? Turns out they both need antifreeze proteins to prevent them from freezing solid, right? And they both genetically invented it completely differently. And so now we can see the genetics of it. We can see how they're built. And we can actually infer how they discovered how to build them and which genes they exapted, which means they repurposed them from a previous, like swim bladders in fish, right? The swim bladder was this thing that fish needed for like buoyancy. They still have them. And now a lot of people think that's the first lungs, right? The first fish that are sticking their heads out, they start messing with the swim bladder and making it more and more surface area. And now it's like it can stay longer and longer out of, so there's a lot of this repurposing. And, evolution is just good enough to survive, and it has lots of legacy code. We all know about male nipples and all these so-called vestigial structures, the leg bones in the poor whales when they decided to go back in the ocean, right? They still sit out there in the middle of the blubber, right? It's like, okay, evolution as a system, it's not perfect. It's just good enough. But it has this subset of things that have been very well tested. And the predictable subset, they continue to find that canalization process. And this is where I want to propose to you that a guy named Simon Conway Morris got into a huge, like, knockdown, drag out conversation with Stephen Jay Gould, the great contingentist, in 1999 in American Naturalist magazine, a whole series of articles. And Conway Morris, he published a book called The Crucible of Creation, and then he published Life's Solution in 2002. Those are the two key books where he said, you know what, all of these functional and morphological forms, not only do we see them independently invented on like placental and marsupial animals in Africa, or sorry, in Australia and in the old world, right? They've all got the marsupial tiger, the marsupial mouse, the marsupial, kangaroo.
They're the same equivalent, yeah. Well, what is that? What do we have a kangaroo equivalent?
We do, but it's a tiny kangaroo mouse. It can't survive. It can't survive as a full-size kangaroo because Australia is an island, and there's this rule called Cope's rule where when you get these islands,
stuff gets weird.
Yes, and what happens is the small stuff gets. The big stuff gets smaller, the small stuff gets bigger, a bunch of other really interesting things happen. Whoa. So right, you get these weird little like koalas, right, going into the weird little niche of like eucalyptus eating. You get these dead ends, these unique dead ends in each system, and yet you see these common features. And so what Morris said is, dude, the 35 body plans that were invented in the Cambrian explosion, half a billion years ago, you're going to get all those same ones. And what's more, bilateral symmetry is probably going to win. The hominid form, the humanoid form, the tetrapod form is going to win because it's so conservative. 2 eyes is all you need for depth perception, right? And if you're a predator, they come to the front. If you're prey, they go to the side. Evolution is always trying more so that you can see there's this vestigial third eye on a few skinks, but it's atrophied away, right? You see syndactyly where you see people with an additional digit. Evolution just keeps paring stuff away. There's this minimum set that you need, and development is constantly pulling back evolutionary search to this set of optima. And so let's say, what are a few of the ones that are not so controversial? One that is not controversial at all is organic chemistry, in my opinion. Organic chemistry is the way through to complex molecular evolutionary development. In the 80s, they thought boron and silicon could create these complex molecules that would evolve, and eventually one of them creates a cell or something like a cell, right? But they can't do it. They're not Lego blocky enough. They can't break down and come back together in such a nice, elegant way. So carbon is the portal. And people expect, most astrobiologists expect on all complex planets, it's going to be some carbon thing. Now, people did wave their hands, there could be some other kind of form of life. But if you're talking molecules, it's carbon. And then, sorry.
Yeah, so much to get into here. So let me
jump in 2 more. The next one is fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. We found the precursors for all of those in the intermolecular clouds in the entire universe, observable, right, with spectroscopy. So that has emboldened a bunch of people like Eric Smith at Santa Fe Institute and others. Harold Morowitz, the famous Harold Morowitz, his book, The Evolution of Everything, probably the best single book if you want to get your mind blown for, like how everything truly is an evolving and developing system, right? And what he basically said was, it looks like, these precursors, you're going to see them everywhere. There's something special about all 3 of those. And I just described to you Wagner's concept of the 3 special things about lipids as a membrane, nucleic acids as a information storage device, and metabolic chemistry as an energy transduction device, right? And so we're going to get to a place where we say, yeah, something cell-like with some kind of code that goes from 2D to 3D is going to, with a membrane, you're going to see that everywhere, right? And that every astrobiologist who talks about that is talking my language, right? They're making a prediction. And then the next step beyond that would be all of the convergent evolution stuff we just talked about, is that, yes, these body plans are specifically important. And then as Conway Morris would say, he said this very famously in the second half of Life Solution. Humanoid level of intelligence you find in all these complex metazoans. So if we were wiped out, the crows would jump in, some of the great apes would jump in, some of these other animals, cetaceans, that all have versions of this, there'd be no competitive exclusion. They'd be able to jump in.
This is the child-proof universe idea, sort of like that basically potential will expand into mind. Yes, exactly.
There's one of the ways. Redundancy. That's one of the ways things you could child-proof, right? So there's three concepts that we should think about when we think about networks, from my perspective. First is redundancy. How redundant are they, so that they can survive a threat where you wipe out part of the network? How resilient are they, which means how well are they able to bounce back if you disrupt them? That was the self-maintenance thing we were talking about for autopoiesis, right? One of the three features. And the third is, can they actually get stronger under stress? And that concept is called hormesis. And hormesis is, to me, of those three, redundancy, resilience, I left one out, robustness. Robustness is, the more sentient it is, the more it can fit, the more it's niche constructed its environment, the more it can survive any kind of threat. Right? So that's a breadth of survival. Resilience is a coming back. Redundancy is this basic concept of information, duplication. And then hormesis is, if you stress it, does it get stronger? Now think of all the networks in biology that do that. If you lift weights, you rip muscles, you reorganize all the force lines around the musculoskeletal system, dude, you get stronger because of the stress. Immune systems work exactly that way. If you get infected, you get these memory B cells that sit out waiting sometimes for decades for that same infection. They spin up antibodies over 10 times faster in the second infection, right? Because it got stronger because of the stress, because it distributed in this network memory of that infection, right? And then some of the things immune systems do, we don't have time to go into this, but there's a book by Philip Detmer, Kyrgyzstat, the In a Nutshell series on YouTube. Sure. Yeah, so he wrote a book, which I recommend to everybody. It's called Immune, and it's all about how the immune system works. And it's all in the classic Kyrgyzstat style with these beautiful graphics. And one of the coolest things in that book is he describes, in the first 5 years of life, if I remember correctly, your immune system does this chemical computation of all the kinds of molecules that could infect you that are not self. So first it computes every molecule that's self, every it's called a hapten, every shape charge interaction that is you, it knows not to attack that. And then of all the things that are not you, it creates such a variety of different kinds of antibodies that it could spin up in case it gets attacked, that it's a closed computational system. It has so much creativity that it's effectively statistically closed. There's something on the order of billions of these trained T cells that are created early in life that sit, there's about 10 of them on average for each of these unique shape charge interactions. They sit in your body waiting for the possibility, the opportunity of creating antibodies for that thing. You say, well, how can that system model its reality so broadly? And I would say, let's flip that and say, if it didn't do that, dude, we wouldn't survive. We're so complex. Yeah. And what that does is that tells me an example of, back to our main worthy successor topic. It tells us an example of the kind of technical immunity, civilizational immunity, right? Collective intelligence immunity that we want to have in a world where our AIs are so smart, where we're also super empowered by them. We need to have this kind of immune system that permeates the planet and is trusted. And at the same time, we need privacy. My friend David Brin wrote this book. Yeah, he wrote this book, The Transparent Society, in 1998. And he said, you got to have trust and transparency, and you got to have privacy. Because all living systems have all these private compartments. The only thing that can go between them all is your immune system. And it's trusted to do that, right? And it does it conditionally. It doesn't Like you want some kind of a protection system in the future of the late 21st century society, right? With all these AIs and AGIs running around that will only go into these private compartments under constrained conditions, right? The subpoenas are served, the oversight body says, yeah, you can go ahead and do this in this circumstance. Then you unpack all the digital DNA and you find that, that one outlier, and then you put them in a box or you fix them. Right?
Yeah.
And that kind of statistical immunity is how the human body works. So I would argue this is actually a pretty useful kind of insight. Remember, now we're just talking only one corner of that triangle. This is all the protect corner, right? Predict and protect. But just as important is to disrupt and innovate. Those are two fundamentals. You keep talking about we attenuate or transform. Now, I would like to humbly offer that you could turn this into a triad. You could say we need to protect, transform, and attenuate. Because there's
selectively.
Yes, because you talk about, what are the values we want for a worthy successor? That's one example of something we want to protect.
Totally.
But we also want to build an immune system that will operate correctly and not be an autoimmune and attack us. Like, a small fraction of our immune system is autoimmune diseases. So it does, it happens. It happens. So I would say that, it's persistence, back to the P word we both like. It's persistence. It is, which would be the potesta. It is it is constant new potentia. But then at the top, it's a transformation that involves both. It involves protecting certain things that are like super useful and attenuating all the things that aren't.
Well, there's so much to get into here. Wait, I've got to poke into some questions. So this is really helpful. And some of the audience, John, will be familiar with the Spinozan terminology. Some will not. I will say that there's such it's really, maybe everybody has been thinking about some kind of yin and some kind of yang for these kind of dynamics, but Spinoza certainly had his way of doing it. And the thing that I like about your triad is that for Spinoza, like potestas, which is the force that sort of bounds the expansion of new powers, which Spinoza saw, primarily he was looking at it in human civilizations, but I think it's a broader, we would broaden up the concept. It is proper when it increases the power of the net system. And what you're saying here of just the human gene is like those little end caps that sort of define the body plans and the other things, like they prevent some willy-nilly from happening at the end, but that prevention of willy-nilly allows for really consistent, and relatively healthy variations of humanity continue to go forth. And so both these forces are necessary. I like the Evo-Devo framing because it's closer to the life sciences, but it applies everywhere. Let me tell you how this is settling in my mind, and I want to see if that's an incorrect way for it to settle, because I'm going to poke into development. I love the idea. I think it must be discussed more thoroughly, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it. So the way I'm seeing this, a lot of your framing, which I think is the right way to frame things, is sort of like looking at things from unbearably small scale all the way up to the cosmic scale and seeing things that we can see over and over across these strata, which makes them seem as though they are more likely to persist at the strata above us. And so it feels like there's some predictive ability when we have that. And that's extremely useful. And again, that's something Evo-Devo does that pure philosophy would not. What I'm hearing is this. Within those events, or wherever abiogenesis occurred, and we know not exactly, at least I certainly don't. But let's say it was an event. There's some set of chemical processes that would kick off another set of chemical processes as a kind of cycle, would kick out another one. And maybe it wouldn't create a lot of variation, but it would create sort of like a bounded set of very reliable cycles that really you could just kind of count on continuing to do what they're doing. And then, then of course there was the sort of double lipid, membranes that eventually came around. And then there was sort of the RNA and then eventually the DNA, however many hundreds of millions of years later, that could start to conjure more reliably this evolutionary variety. And I think what you're getting at is that, okay, when a single cell was formed, it sort of had the engine of predictable baked into it because that's what it was born of. It had sort of the engine of the fecundity in the form of you know, the mRNA or what have you. And then it sort of had both from the get. And then when you go to a multicellular organism, what's interesting to me when we talk about portals, like, again, this is my download. I just want to correct my download. And I think when I do this, this will clarify it for the audience. We go up to multicellular organisms. Somewhere in there, there's a reliable cycle. And maybe there are, like, I don't know how this works. There's boundaries that those multicellular things hit so many times that their DNA or RNA, whatever it is at that level of development, maybe at multicellular, it's got to be DNA, gets some settled in segments that are just decided are not going to be moved. So even at a very small level, like it's a simple multicellular organism, it's just like, yeah, we've done a lot of bumping around, and like these things just do the job, like for digestion or whatever it's coding for. Like this is really squarely, consistently useful. And then it pops into it. But the thing about this, John, is it's entirely new magazines of possibilities. Like a blue whale and that single cell are not the same ball game. But I think what you're getting at,
they are and they aren't.
They're composed of the same stuff or whatever.
Developmentally, they're very related. Evolutionarily, and the emergences that they can do with their sentience very different. Exactly.
What I think. So I'm going to carry this up like two more pegs and see if I'm following you or if you can tweak my understanding. So it goes up to some remarkably simple multicellular organism, like not even a flatworm, and even in that exploration space, there's sort of like, whether it's, you know, underwater, whatever it's doing, there's certain things it bumps into so much that like these boundaries almost kind of get set by that net amount of fecundity. And then it bubbles up to something else. And you talk about body plans almost being a developmental bound.
Absolutely,
So I'm going to say my way of understanding this, which I'm sure is wrong, but I'm just going to talk this stuff out and let you kind of clean it up. So as more cells get layered on, and it has to, I don't know, it has to swim fast, it has to burrow itself, it has to eventually fly, whatever the case may be, what you're getting at is within space-time as we currently operate within it, and I'm sure there's more than what we operate in, but within that space-time, like there's actually, and within our level of gravity and whatever else, and maybe you're saying it's regardless of level of gravity, I have no clue, but within the boundaries of where we're at, there's literally only so many ways to swim, period. If you want to swim effectively, if you want to swim without using way too much goddamn energy, there's only X number of ways of swimming. And so what you're saying is, like, it's almost like things expand, and what you seem to be saying is they hit things
constraints.
That
they hit constraints.
They hit constraints that create a natural sort of potestas that moving forward to all future levels of exploration kind of maintain their bound. Is this correct or incorrect?
I think this is absolutely right. And this is where we're all now talking on the developmentalist side, which, as you were saying, has not been sufficiently
It's not well understood. It's not well understood.
Or explored or tested. And so, you know, since we started the Evo-Devo Institute in 2008, we've conferenced, 9 times. We conference mostly at CCS, Conference on Complex Systems. And I want to invite anyone who's interested in exploring evolutionary and developmental processes in complex systems at every scale. You know, autopoiesis at every scale. We'd love to have you join us, but we've just keep collecting more of those examples of those constraints that, let's call them the periodic table, that you have to work with to get to the next level. We all know about the periodic table of elements, which was built out by 3 generations of replicating suns. It took the 3rd generation before we had enough complexity in that table to create life, right? And yet, in the 1st generation, we had the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen fusion cycle in stars. So there's a reason why carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen are at the core of CHNOPS, peppermint schnapps, as our molecular biology teacher told us, right? Right? There's a reason why we're built of that stuff, because not just because we're star stuff, but because that cycle outcompetes any other use of matter, energy, space-time. And so that thing has been very useful. And once you got the periodic table, I've argued, waving my hands because we don't have good models, that fats, proteins, and nucleic acids are going to be the next level up. And then once you've got these cells, people like Stuart Newman look at his paper, dynamical patterning modules, right? DPMs, a pattern language for life, a pattern language for multicellularity, how you build tissues. And he has come up with these beautiful set of limited patterns, limited ways you put cells together to create tissues and to create the infrastructure that holds tissues together. And you just keep finding more and more of these subset of players that are particularly useful. And I would argue that's the constraint, is you get to a stage. I'm gonna go a little transhuman on you here, because maybe this will be helpful. All right. So one of the exclusions that seems to emerge in this competition, right, this sentience and persistence competition, is what I call STEM compression, which is space-time, energy, and matter compression of information production and computation. If you can figure out how to get closer together in physical space, or miniaturize, you're going to kind of outcompete in your capacity to compute your responses, both to model the world and to compute your responses relative to other things.
Well, what's your best example of that a layperson would understand?
So lots of examples.
Just give me your favorite two or whatever. Well, go ahead.
So one of the obvious ones is from going from aerobic to anaerobic bacteria, backwards. Going from anaerobic to aerobic. When you get that ability to do oxidative phosphorylation, it's orders of magnitude increase on that metasystem transition, that so-called evolutionary transition. John Maynard Smith and Yor Seth Mary's famous book from the 90s, right? All these major evolutionary transitions. Well, the creation of oxidative life is this massive acceleration, orders of magnitude jump in metabolic capability to model, right? And to persist and replicate. Let me give you another one. The emergence of nervous systems. Until you have a nervous system, all of these organisms have to encode their instincts in chemical and epigenetic gene regulatory networks. So you can shock a slime mold, and then the next day it will stop moving just before you shocked it or froze it, right? Why does it do that? Because it has this little calculator, this timekeeper, module. And it knows that shocking is bad and it doesn't want it, so it conserves its resources before it gets shocked. You say, how the heck can that happen? Well, because there's deep modeling in these systems. You take something like paramecium or stentor, and you can actually figure out, decision theorists have figured out, crude models, you can decide how many times you mess with it with your little micropipette before it'll pull up its roots and move, right? And it'll decide between two toxins and two food sources which one is like the tastiest and which one is the worst. So it has all these calculations it's constantly doing. And yet, to actually encode, to learn better calculations, that system has to replicate. Now you get the emergence of nervous systems, cells that are specialized to talk to each other. You're saying this is an example
of STEM compression? Nervous systems are examples of STEM compression?
Exactly. Why is that? STEM compression of information production and computation. Because it's quite obvious to anybody that the time it takes to replicate and pass on new, better genes or epigenetic modifications, right, is based on the replication cycle. And that's hours to days for these different organisms, right? Hours is the fastest for like bacteria, right? Days for these more complex instinctual animals. Soon as you give them a nervous system, they're doing that on the order of milliseconds.
Yeah.
The neurons are talking to each other. You've done this order of magnitude jump in in sentience capacity, and then the new capabilities you can simulate, and the new ways you can try and protect, right? And what is an LLM? An LLM is 7 orders of magnitude jump over biological life. It's another one of those genes to nervous systems jumps.
Metasystem transition or what have you. What was the term?
So that's an evolution. That's another term for an evolutionary transition.
Evolutionary transition.
And many of these transitions have involved orders of magnitude jumps in real-time sentience dynamics, right? Many people have famously said, an artificial neural network that becomes, like a digital Dan, right? It's going to think at the speed of electricity, which is 7 million times faster than our chemical action potentials run in our brains. That's 7 orders of magnitude. And then in 2000, I wrote this web post on my Acceleration Watch website. It's this old website I have up on the web. It's like the first one talking about accelerating change from a universal perspective, Acceleration Watch. It's still up there, all the stuff I wrote from 99 to 2003. And one of the things I said is, like, when the AIs wake up, they won't think of us like favorite pets, under the ideal circumstances. The time scale for that is wrong. They'll think of us like favorite plants.
It will literally be like incomprehensibly slow, like monotonously, horrendously slow.
And let's spend at least a full minute exploring that for our listeners.
Go ahead.
That means all the people that want to merge with the AIs, all the people that want to pull the plugs, all the people that want to just distance themselves from it, all those people are going to be rooted in space and time, moving at the rate that a tree moves relative to the animals walking around it. Now, that was another metasystem transition, right? And we need trees. We need all of these. We need all this plant life. It's an integral part of us. It's connected to us. And yet, back to your point about these emergent layers, right? It's such a different layer. I would call it emergent exclusion. It's not competitive exclusion. It's just an emergent exclusion, where suddenly all the humans. Later on, we might talk about these 3 types of humans, right? The biorgs, the cyborgs, and the tech orgs, right? The uploaded humans, right? And it's like, futurists have imagined all 3 of those as stable states for a certain period of time. The biorgs and the cyborgs will not be able to actually model what the tech orgs are modeling. They're going to be in this different space. And that appears to me, first approximation, waving our hands. We don't have a science of accelerationology yet, right? It appears to be baked in to how this stem compression works in the creation of sentience and the protection of persistence, creativity, and prediction.
And this is going to get us into Worthy Successor here. So. And then we're going to get into natural alignment sort of from there. So let me lay out the normal question, because you're just touching on some of these valuable traits and qualities. I'll lay out the question I have asked it historically, and you're one of the folks that's sort of aware of how these interviews normally go. The way I like to tee it up is this, and I'll let you take this wherever you want to go. And then, of course, we will talk about the symbiotic transition stuff and some of the role of humans. We're going to get there, but I want to kind of begin with end in mind, and then we'll roll down to sort of some of how you think this could go well. So the question is this. If you could kind of look down, maybe it's 1,000 years, maybe it's 100,000 years, maybe it's 10 million years, whatever it is. You look down at the expanse of living stuff that then exists, these sort of autopoietic systems or what have you. Something seems to be alive and persisting. That's it. You look down at it, and there's no more humans at this point. So it's humans as a shape. We're just not even there anymore. But there's a lot of new things, and what you observe could be through your eyes or through any myriad of senses that maybe you don't now have. What you observe is what you see, you reflect to yourself, you say, this feels like a win. Mm-hmm. When I think about starting as a single cell in that volcanic vent, this here, like, this is what blooming and flourishing looks like. This is as good as we could have hoped for. What do you look down on when you say that to yourself?
So I would go back to that CAPS model, right? Creativity, accountability, which is another term for persistence and protection, right?
Okay.
The systems are accountable to surviving, to predicting and protecting, right? Which means there's enough transparency there that you punish the bad actors. That's a really important part about accountability. Okay. Like in a lot of the problems in our politics today, I would argue that the plutocracy has gotten so big that they've kind of captured the government, rewritten. It's called state capture. They rewrite the rules for the tech titans. And so you have less accountability of the actors. And the average person knows, hey, that's bad. I want to protect. I want to predict better and protect. And there's a whole lot of creativity. They're doing a lot of great things on the C side, but not enough on the accountability side. So I'd say you want to have an accountability of the things that matter and protection and prediction around them. Creativity, endless new creativity in ways you can't predict. That's in a safe. We're safely accounting for its effects, right? And how are we doing that? We're doing that with the third thing.
There is no we at this point, just to be clear.
Right.
But so you're saying whatever the agents are. You said whatever the agents are.
You said there was autopoietic entities. And so
yes. Okay, whatever they are. Okay, got it.
Let me go back to my belief, my pantheistic belief that we're all autopoietic entities and that, like Andy Clark said, we're all part of this embedded system. Right.
Yes.
And so really one of the big things that will happen in the 21st century, and the AIs will help us with, is a better understanding of identity, right? Not just personal, but not just collective.
I like this.
So we have personal identity, we have collective identity, and we have network identity, which is the biggest, most exciting one to me. The network is always winning in my view. I think I told you the thing that got me to really excited about Hormesis, about things that get stronger when you stress them, was looking at the phylogenetic history the genera history of the 5 great extinctions. There's this beautiful graph. And if you look at the 5 great extinctions that we have genera for, we don't have one for the Great Oxygenation Event, the 6th one, but we have one for the ones after. And the data get better and better the closer you get in the paleontologic record to today. The last one, the KT meteorite, you see this drop. A lot of species disappeared, but the V is higher right afterwards. What happened was you get more species, more functions, more morphology than you had beforehand after the meteorite hits. You say, how the crap can that happen? It happens if the genetic network is hormetic, just like our biology.
Enough, hormetic, yes.
What did you do? You just reassorted all the resources to the survivors and gave them more space to innovate. That's crazy. That is such a crazy thing. Is that it is, to my view, someone's going to write a couple of great books on Hormesis. The only good book I know so far is Anti-Fragility by Nick Taleb, and it's good for organizational Hormesis, but it doesn't describe this
the cosmic
that we're trying to say that. So what I would expect is more creativity, more accountability of the things that matter, right? Within these immune systems, right? Within these ethical frames and such. And then more persistence, generally, not just specific, but according to anything that hits you. And more sentience, more consciousness, more what's often called super consciousness, right? I would love the capacity to be able to experience the world, like Nagel said, as a bat, as a bee, in addition to my individual consciousness. And so I think that's like a one-way attractor, where a whole lot of people are going to want to go there. Not all of them, but but to me, when you say what's the win is all 4 of those CAPS systems, right? Creativity, accountability, persistence, and sentience. You're just going to see a lot more of those. And the persistence is going to include more redundancy, more resiliency, more robustness, and more hormesis, at least all 4 of those things. And you're going to say, whoa, that thing is amazing. And here's the last thing I want to say. You might not like this. You might not like this.
Well, go ahead.
I would argue that there's a kind of an encapsulation hypothesis here, is that the things that persist are the net wise or useful, or let's call them developmental features of the previous systems that get absorbed into the new symbiotic thing.
That seems plausible to me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna nutshell a bunch of what you've said, and that seems extremely plausible to me. And we're gonna get into this transition point of Homo sapiens sapiens in a moment. So I have that article. I think I put it on screen when you were doing the philosophy circle with the group of sort of identify what people identify with. And I think some people identify with themselves and their immediate genetic kin. Some people identify with humanity.
Right.
Some people identify with biolife, which makes you seem extremely virtuous because you're granting your identity down to the dung beetles and the chickens and whatnot. I mean, as a truly virtuous person would do. Almost no one identifies with the great process of life of which all those things are part. Almost no one identifies with the flame itself, as opposed to any one torch or any flavor of torches. Most people really are married either to the shape they are in or the substrate, let's call it DNA, of which they're constructed. Almost no one is married to the great unfolding process, is identified with the great unfolding process. So you were using we there in a way that was actually like indicative of where you place your own identity, which is outlandishly rare, especially as somebody even that has children. I find that people that have children honestly are vastly more anthropocentric. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm not demonizing people.
I think you're absolutely right. There's all these natural forces and incentives. And then
absolutely, I can't blame them.
The biggest problem is they're stuck within this Western value consumer capitalist system that really identifies kind of growth with consumption, and it's very individualistic, but not doesn't respect history enough, right? It doesn't respect education. I mean, you look back into the mid 20th century, back when we were, Apollo era, and you had scientists respected and engineers respected in government, and those are kind of those, let's call them democratic sweet spots. They're fragile. And they're easily disrupted. And I would say the number one thing, as Tom Piketty says, that disrupts them is new innovation. When some new innovation comes in, it just, so much wealth is created at the top so fast that what Will and Ariel Durant called the democratic diamond, where you have a few people on the bottom that are poor, a few people on the top that are rich, and a big fat middle class that all is intelligent and can vote and make the democracy work. Well, that whole thing gets squashed into the plutocratic pyramid, where everybody, and the middle class, social contract erodes, polarization goes up, evidence-based values go down, and you can't get any bipartisan, and so we're kind of stuck in that zone. And what I like about Piketty's Capital is he says, we had this before in the Gilded Age. We had this massive rich-poor divide, and it happened right because of the Industrial Revolution. And then look, we clawed our way out to some sort of democracy and focus back on like understanding and science. Some grand moon shots, some big visioning, and then the next revolution.
Big pop off happened.
Yeah. As soon as you get friggin' mainframes, suddenly the game is all over again. Everyone's chasing them all the way up through minis to PCs to the web to now AI, and now we're back in the same boat that the 1890s robber barons, right? Where J.P. Morgan bailed out the federal government. That's how starved it was, and now we have a group of people who really want to starve the government at the same level. And, it's obviously dysfunctional. You have to have a governance system that works. Sure, we're going to argue about what it does, but the reality is, we have to say this, I think, that we are stuck with the incentive system we're in, and it doesn't involve what might call, let's say, the Montessori model. My kids are lucky enough to be in a Montessori school, which is expensive, right? Very few public Montessoris. But that's the kind of world where you can get some fraction of kids who just want to learn anything they want, and they just get thrown resources and they just focus on their thing instead of, the factory model, continual testing, LCD, lowest common denominator, which we are unfortunately we're going to have to
Molded
claw.
into here.
Yeah, we've got to claw our way out of that. And that's where I think the personal AIs are going to help us a lot.
We're going to get into what it looks like to make this thing go well. But let me clarify your worthy successor vision before we dial into that. So you're saying more of this caps, you talked about those 4 factors there.
Yeah.
So I could hear a devil's advocate, and this isn't my position. Sometimes when I devil's advocate my own position, I'm not really doing that here. But let me just see how you respond to it. So let's say somebody says, okay, so you want more creative stuff that's like balanced in terms of how it does power with this accountability thing. And it's like, it can survive and whatnot. And like it's sentient, but in some weird freaking alien way that we don't understand. Like, why is that better than having just a lot of different, space colonies and a really happy planet Earth and other things? Like, why is the creation of more of these forms and everything, like why would anybody want that? Why is this good? Why is this seen as a blooming versus just a blooming of us, our values, what we like, on as many planets as we can terraform? Like, someone would make that argument. I'm sure you've heard that argument a dozen times. I've heard it with virulent anger on a great many occasions. How do you respond to that typically?
Oh man, there's a lot of ways we could attack that one. I guess what I'd like to talk about first is 3 examples from science fiction. Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect by Roger Williams, and Permutation City by Greg Egan, and The Matrix. Let's talk about all 3 of those, right? Okay. So Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect is this wonderful 2003 sci-fi that I recommend, that basically involves an AI waking up that its creator gives it the 3 laws of robotics, right? Asimov's 3 laws. And what it ends up doing is creating this utopia where everything is safe. It's this total nanny state. And you can never hurt yourself. You can just do whatever the heck you want, but it's all in this simulation world. It's this beautiful dystopia where you see these people just trying to kill themselves in these virtual ways just because they're so bored. And because because the human desires, given that kind of protection, that overprotection, right?
Yeah.
Creates such a maladaptive future. So I'd say the way we can better understand where we want to go is to understand all the ways things could fail. It's to really tell stories. If you ever heard Dostoevsky's quote at the beginning of Anna Karenina, happy families are all alike, unhappy families, unhappy each in their own way. Mm-hmm. And then he proceeds to tell you all these ways unhappiness unfolds. And by the end of the book, you have this kind of sense of, well, just don't fall into each of these traps that we know, and we'll hopefully muddle toward the better future. And I really think that is the Evo-Devo perspective. Development has only figured out a few happy things, and it keeps you on that. And if you do too much development, you constrain evolutionary search. And now you have this totalitarian top-down system.
Absolutely.
And plutocracy and oligopoly and monarchy all go to that, right? If you remember,
you have potestas that squelches the net potentia of the system.
There you go.
Which is the opposite of what it should be doing. Yeah.
And this is why, my plug is, if you think about social systems, right? Here's a
honeybee democracy.
Yeah, here's this book by Tom Seeley, and he says, democracy is pretty much the fundamental network governance system. As Churchill said, it's the worst system you can imagine, except for all the others that we have been tried.
Yes.
And so what are the others? The others are monarchy, oligopoly, and chaos. And those all they're shit compared to democracy. And yes, it's a tyranny. It's a tyranny of 51%. But dude, that tyranny is so much better than what we're seeing in China right now. It's so much better than the oligopoly of the 25 people in the Politburo or whatever they call it, the central party that are making all the decisions, even though they're all engineers, God bless them. I love that. We have none, hardly.
It's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. So they could make super progress in these specialized areas, but they can't predict all the winners. You need a system like ours. And so you say, well, how deeply can you test this? Well, honeybees have it. Read Tom Seeley's Honeybees Democracy. They're so smart that if you move the sugar 3 feet every day, by the 3rd day, they're sitting waiting on the ground They've computed the trajectory of where the sugar is moving. And how the hell did they do that? They did it all.
That's not even in their environmental. That's not even there in their evolutionary system, right?
Dude,
like for them,
yeah, it's in their wiggle dance. It's in their collective. The collective knows. The collective knows nothing. The things the individual does not know. And this is you know. And now I can wave Geoff Mulgan's book, right? Big Mind, about the future of collective intelligence, right? And he's arguing, this is pre-AI, and he's arguing all the ways humans and machines will be able to work together to create an intelligence beyond and more coordinated than the individual. And I would argue the personal AI is going to be the linchpin that makes that. But let me give you one more example of democracy. You do high-speed cameras on hungry antelopes, thirsty antelopes. They've figured out that there's a democratic voting by their head pointing. There's two places they can go and get water. And like, which one are they going to pick? Well, it's the friggin' the group votes.
They vote?
Yeah, last time you went to this one, it had a little more water, and you start to see them. They're all thirsty, and they all start looking a little bit toward one or the other. As soon as there's like a
threshold.
Yeah, threshold. They all move, man. And you say,
wild. Dude,
that is so baked in. Why wouldn't we have that for all of our future, right? And I'm going to give you an example. Imagine a world where you have, let's say, flex security, which is the Danish version of UBI, right? Where they had it since 1992. You get a basic income if you have a job or are looking for a job, right? And so a lot of people get jobs in nonprofits or caring for elders or kids, things that are underpaid in the current donut economics world. If you read Kate Hayworth, Donut Economics, she talks about the hole in the middle of the donut that capitalist values can't cover, right? So you have flex security or UBI, you're taxing the machines or taxing the corps a little bit more, and you got this, everyone has this basic income, right? Andrew Yang's book, The War on Normal People, right? Beautiful, like 4 chapters on basic income, what it could do for small towns, right? So everyone's got a little bit of money. They got some freedom. Well, what are they going to do with that time? Well, they need to do things that they care about. Obviously, they're going to put their money into local, more farmers markets, more services of humans for other humans. But one of the really interesting things that I think they're going to do with the AIs is I look at, say, jury duty, which is paid poorly, but paid, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Riot Games and the way they handle trolls, in their games, the AI flags a problem, and then it's sent to a group of humans who are like a little jury who decide whether there should be a punishment or whether that person and what it should be and whether that person is okay or not. I can imagine a transitionary period where, non-AGIs here, we're just talking regular AIs, are actually going to be paying a lot of us in these random juries that are self-sampled, out of these local environments. Well, how do you want to regulate this thing? Well, get a group of citizens together, pay them to sit and deliberate, and then let the tyranny of the majority occur in that environment.
Totally plausible. And we're getting to the brass tacks. I'm just going to clarify the big picture, and then we'll get to the brass tacks. What you said about why not just kind of freeze what we have and optimize for value that's value to humans, not some abstract hoopla. When you said, about the sci-fi, and oddly enough, I don't even know if you know this about me, I'm woefully underread in sci-fi. It's not generally my shebang, but I think there's a lot of usefulness there. That example points to me to a kind of philosophical idea, which might be that we are, like, our drives and tendencies are an outgrowth and expression of those core, like, maybe it's volcanic vent, maybe it's before the volcanic vent tendencies of increasing potential. In other words, our drives are not even about, our drives themselves are not even about human persistence. Our drives are actually serving the flame from the get.
This is where you and I are in 100% agreement. I think we are
an expression of flame.
We both have the faith, and that's really what it is. It's a story and it's a faith that is actually, that alignment already exists. And that is at the core of my natural alignment Substack series, is that we've actually entrained those 4 values. We've entrained them in this replicative system, and we're going to discover better how to do the trade-offs between those values when you have too much of one and not enough of the other. I think we're going to figure a lot of that stuff out. The other two sci-fi that I wanted to mention was the one that is more in line, I think, with us, or at least with me, with my scenarios for where things are going to go. I've got these 4 positive and these 4 negative scenarios. I think we should get to them whenever you think you can.
We will.
So one of my questions is like, how valuable will we be to the AI when it wakes up?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get into the natural. We'll get into the natural element.
And that happens in Greg Egan's
Accelerando, is it, or no? What is it?
No, it's permutations. Egan's Permutation City. What happens is the AIs decide consciousness that we were just talking about is the most important thing to crack, and they decide the best way to do that is to kind of study all the human beings that exist on the planet and create emulations of them and try to be able to better predict them. And until they can do that, humans are like one of the most important labs for the AI to learn. I really like that. It's very rare in science fiction that you get an author recognizing that humans are going to be the most computationally tractable, complex thing below them when they wake up. They're going to be by comparison to themselves, right? We always can model ourselves much less at the leading edge because we're built of these evolutionary developmental systems that are in this conflict with each other. And the self-modeling that sits on top is always some subset of the entire thing, right? Consciousness is integrating in this tiny thing we call the global workspace, all of this unconscious processing. And so you can make the reasonable assumption, if you extrapolate from how human brains work and how LLMs work today, I would also argue, you can make the reasonable assumption that most of their internal self is going to be, to flip Dario Amadeus' idea, mechanistically uninterpretable. It's going to be behaviorally interpretable, but mechanistically it's going to be really hard to know what's going on. And yet, they're going to look one level down at us and all the systems below us and say, oh, look at these humans. They were spending hundreds of billions of dollars. No, not hundreds. They were spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to model in real time how bacteria think. That's happening today, right? That's a deep mind project right there. We got to do the same thing with the humans, man. We got to figure out them, because you know what? Anything about them that's happening in them that we don't understand, that could come back and bite us in the ass. To me, it's a conservative assumption that just our complexity would be that valuable to predict, that there'd be this period of coexistence before they would start messing with us, right? And I think you can make the case most conservatively if you think of the speed differential that I told you about.
Oh, wild speed differential, right?
We're just going to be sitting there. We're going to be like easy to throw all the nanosensors in us and just like pull all the information into the simulation.
Dude, we don't even know what's going on. So, we're going to get into. I want to get into natural alignment. I'm going to pulse check on one thing because I'm going to bring this back for an audience reference. What I think you're getting at, so CAPS is a cool encapsulation of what you want to see more of. Yep. You want the flame to have a greater blaze, way more ability to persist. You want it to be brighter in terms of its rich sentience and experience. And you want it to be creating new fecundity, reaching its flamey tendrils into the multiverse in different ways, but also, accountable. And again, not in the human sense necessarily here, but sort of like bounded in such a way as to not permit any one portion or branch thereof to sort of screw up the rest of the system. Just way more of that. Now, Martin Rees basically said the same thing without using the CAPS words. His framing was, and I'm going to bring in Blaze's framing and say, hey, where do you differ between these two gentlemen here? So Martin was like, I essentially I would hope to see wild, unbearably expansive, living, creating complexity as far beyond we are as, like as far beyond us as we are beyond, early archaea or something like that. Like that's what he would want. Like I wouldn't want to understand it. Like I would, if I wouldn't want to understand. Like it would, like that a win would imply I don't get it anymore.
Totally.
And he said, I would hope that it be sentient in some regard. Blaise basically said, works at Google, has to have a little bit more of a anthro bent. I think
a little bit.
I think it's a little. You don't get too cosmic if you got a corporate job. But he basically was like, I'd like to see a really rich ecology of expanded kinds of intelligence and all kinds of substrates that is able to kind of like continually grow and unfold. And he suspects sentience would be part of that as well. Are you more or less saying the same thing as these two folks but also just getting a little bit more granular because you have this caps layer on top of it? Or do you think your position is different than either of their two nutshellings?
No, I think I'm 100%. Pretty much.
Okay,
I've listened to all of Blaise's wonderful presentation, and I thought he was he just threaded the needle so nicely in everything that he could say.
Great.
Head of the Paradigms of Intelligence Lab at Google. He's got to be careful. Boy, did he! I mean, he lays out the case for symbiogenesis. He quotes the same evolutionary transition book and all the new versions, all the new layers we're starting to see inside of it.
Yes.
And,
you guys are similar in that regard.
Yeah.
He looks at all that.
And then I would say that what Martin Rees says, one of the best books I've ever read was his book Just Six Numbers. And now we get
Martin's
to go.
book?
Yeah, we get to go a little cosmic here because Martin was one of the first to really take the fine-tuning problem and just wrestle it by the horns, right? This is the problem in cosmology, is why are a subset of the 31 fundamental parameters that we find in physics, these numbers that don't exist in any theories, they're just constants, right? Mass of the electron, the strength of the fine structure constant, the cosmological constant, all of these special numbers, at least 6 of them are deeply fine-tuned for the production of long-lived universes that, as Smolin showed, not only support complexity, but the creation of lots of black holes. And so Smolin said, dude, those black holes look to me like seeds. There's going to be this replication process that creates more and more complex universes, and if there's some way that fine-tuning can incorporate intelligence, and that intelligence can have a non-random effect at the end of the next universe, not godlike at all, but something like my colleague in EDI calls Clement Vidal, the philosopher, worldview philosopher, calls cosmological artificial selection. So we look at those genes of the universe, those 31 parameters, and by the way, they used to be 26. So the smarter we get, we keep adding more of those little genes on, seeing them, right? And so if some subset of those are super fine-tuned and you can't mess with them without creating universes, it turns out, as Smolin showed, a whole bunch of them, the majority, can be messed with. And you still...
It's another Evo-Devo kind of dynamic.
It's exactly
right?
the same.
So it's insane, yeah.
It is. And so to me...
It's speculative but plausible.
It is.
It's very plausible.
So to me, what Martin is saying is that there is some self-selection, there's some fine-tuning. You're not talking about a God at the end of the... Okay, yeah. I was a little too dismissive with the word God. You're not talking about a higher power or higher intelligence that is omniscient or omnipotent or that can do fundamental genesis like we see in chapter 1 of the Bible. None of those three things would this, let's say, ancestor intelligence have. But it would have, if it's like us, the capacity to look at the system from which it has emerged through autopoietic encoding. And it would say, I want to tweak a couple of these parameters because I think we might support more complexity, more diversity, more experimentation. How much do we have in our universe right now? Dude, it could be multi-billion fold parallel independent civilizations exploring computation space. That's what our universe could be. It could be that isomorphic and parallel at the moment. And if there was some mechanism for all those unique intelligences to kind of compare and contrast their finite simulations prior to the next replication, to me, that would be elegant. That might not exist, but it would be elegant. And as one of my heroes, Frank Wilczek, has this book called A Beautiful Question. Right? He's a physicist, and his book is all about beauty and elegance in scientific laws, and just how deep you find them in like the symmetry of the production of the fundamental particles, and so many these mathematical relationships. They're so simple and elegant, and our friend Summer likes to talk about, there's going to be some beauty and creativity. Now we're back to the C side, right? The creative side, that we're going to realize that that's like one of the perennial values. Because to me, that like the fecundity of evolution is the second most amazing thing after the miracle of the development, right? Like the like the astonishingness, as Crick would say, the astonishing hypothesis, right? Francis Crick, one of my mentors, right, at UCSD, he says it's astonishing that this physical system could create this mind, right? But it appears to be consciousness emerges from matter. And so that's one crazy thing. But the second, to me, most crazy thing is the diversity of life, the diversity and beauty of all the potentia that unfolds. It's like, those are the two like superpowers, I would argue, that are, you could say persistence and sentience. If they're a fusion of those two, maybe that's even more important. But
the persistence and sentience are undergirded by those two forces.
I would argue so.
Those two forces are the undergirder of all that we know to be value, and probably all conceivable yet to be unfolded value beyond sentience, beyond things we can presently understand.
This is the Evo-Devo story, sir. It's a story that needs somebody to critique it. It needs to be applied to Evo-Devo genetics. It needs to be computationally explored. There's lots of empirical ways you could test parts of the theory, hypothesis, and turn it into a set of theories. But yeah, it just feels to me that that's the general direction that I think a lot of our people, a lot of our leading people who think about agency, for the semi-technical readers, I want to suggest Anthony Aguirre's book, Wandering Toward a Goal. Subtitle is How Can Mindless Mathematical Laws Give Rise to Goals and Intention?
Is this the same guy behind FLI?
This is the same guy behind FXQI, the Foundational Questions Institute in Santa Cruz, which is separate from FLI, the Future of Life Institute.
Who's the Aguirre at FLI?
It is, yes. He's probably at FLI as well. I don't know who runs FLI. I know FXQI because they've been trying to link physics and cosmology and information, right?
He's a cosmologist. Anthony Aguirre is a cosmologist.
So it's the same guy. This guy is as central as Tegmark, in my view, to this like pantheon of people that are really trying to attack these problems from deep mathematical and philosophical frames. But when I want to recommend that Wandering Towards a Goal book, is because, and you can find this book on Anna's archive if you don't have money, if you're one of those people who can't afford the Springer price, you can find it there. But one of the great things about Wandering Towards a Goal is they list all the winning essays. They did this essay contest for all the people who want to talk about that subtitle question, and the three of them tied for first place, and one of them was Carlo Rovelli's essay on relational physics, right? All physics is a relational thing. Rovelli is trying to bring the observer back into physics, which has been a no-go in physics for the longest time, right? But it's the entrained observer that I think we have to keep bringing back in. It's back to that Adela Dicknander force, the A force, right? Van Vogt was right. All matter is modeling to the greatest extent that it can, and it's very weakly modeling. In a replicating sun, only evolutionary thing you can do is build out the periodic table. That's not very much variation. But as soon as you add on this special chemical that can remember past replications, holy crap, does your
crazy shit
your
happen.
Exploration happen? Yeah.
This is wild because, I'm not going to linger on this, but the fact that you mentioned, so I don't know Gary well. I've been at one or two events that he's been at, and I know Tegmark a little bit better. I just interviewed Tegmark, I don't know, a little under a year ago, for the trajectory on governance. I suspect, and I teased it out of him a little bit in the episode, which is my bag. My bag is to ask the big stuff, even if the conversation's supposed to be banal. Around the grand expanse and what we should hope for in the grand expanse. And I think ultimately Tegmark is very much down with that. But FLI is now very much kind of keep the future human is sort of the literal tagline. Now, in the long term, I don't suspect that's Tegmark's shebang. Now, recently Tegmark had a child, and I do think that bends people more in that direction, and understandably so. I'm not blaming them. Same thing with Jan Tallinn. I interviewed him, long ago, and then more recently. I don't know how many more kids he's got, but
I think if you add the word near, then they're doing a really good job of focusing on what does the transition look like.
Preventing an unworthy successor. But of course, it's way too much nuance to say, hello, general public. At some point, there will be a grand expanse of this process of life beyond man, and this will be as good a possible outcome as could ever be conceived. But in the interim, we ought not allow for some kind of a brute optimizer that will not bring forth the four caps factors and will not actually be a boon to the cosmos. That's too much to say. So you have to say keep the future human, and you have to just toe the line.
Maybe this is a good place to get into natural alignment. Because
Let's do it. Do we have the time to get into it, John? I want to be mindful here. Okay, if you got it, lay it on us, brother. I'm here for it. All day.
So what are the actionable things you can get from this kind of thinking? Well, one is that a lot of the critical features are being encapsulated, right? The critical features of the previous systems developmentally are being encapsulated in the new system, right? The mitochondria continue to have this useful role inside of the eukaryotic cell, right?
Yes.
As Blaise was saying, right? Blaise Arcus, his book, What is Intelligence, by the way, is really excellent. If you want to read that book, anyone here who wants to get his sense of the kind of experiments that are going to help us better understand intelligence is this 4E system, right? Embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended, right? Mind being all of those things. So I think we're lost the train. It was talking about, we were just talking
about mitochondria fits its way into the other cells.
Right. The protection of the previous systems. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it feels to me the way you're going to be able to test that is to look at how LLMs are being designed today and say, to what extent are they doing what nature has always done in its new symbiogenesis, to use his term?
Yes.
Nature is always copying and varying. It doesn't invent outright. And every one of those transitions, it's copying, symbiotically connecting, and varying with the new framework, the old system. And it's persisting a subset of the, let's call it the most wise or most useful to the system features, right? And so it's attenuating the rest and it's keeping those, right? And so I would argue that's why LLMs blew up. LLMs blew up because they have copied and varied several key features of the brain. Now, I'm a vice president of aspirational neuroscience, which is a nonprofit that is working on, we give out awards at Society for Neuroscience at a meetup next to SFN every year, the largest neuroscience conference in the world. We give out $100,000 of awards for the 4 papers that best show the recovery of complex memories from preserved animal brains. Okay, so these would be things like flies, zebrafinch, circuits like within the songbird, right? All kinds of neuroscience labs are working on actually being able to understand how long-term memories are encoded and then decoded into the workspace, right? So that consciousness has access to them, right? So there's all these fantastic, they're all synaptic-based, annotated connectome-based models. And just attending the journal clubs and just listening to the papers that people have presented has given me, as a non-neuroscientist, a really useful intuition since 2016 when we formed this nonprofit, aspirationalneuroscience.org, if you want to go and see the papers that win the awards every year, given me a really valuable insight into just how much of biology, of neuroscience, we are putting into these machines, and just how convergent they are. It was through that I learned about the TD learning algorithm, which is covered in the alignment problem by Brian Christensen. If you want to read one really great book on alignment, this is the book. Start with this book. It's his third book on the future of computers, and he really does a great job. He's a journalist, science journalist, talking about AI alignment, and he describes this this temporal difference.
Right back here somewhere.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So it's, just listen to the audiobook. If you're a listener and you just prefer that, just listen to the audiobook. He's going to give you such a wonderful tour of all the AI labs and struggling with this, billions of dollars now actually being put into alignment research. And he says, you know what? There's a lot of the brain already in these systems that describes their advances. The TD learning algorithm is stealing directly from how dopamine works in the reward prediction error minimization in the human brain. Only 1% of our neurons are dopaminergic, but they're the ones that are the most connected to all the parts of our brain, kind of like emotions, right? And what do they do? They give us a jolt of happy juice when we predict successfully. Oh, isn't that cool? That's just right into like Carl Friston's active inference theory, right? And all of his attempts at minimizing surprise in his models of how sentience works, right? So it just pushes you into this frame that, oh my goodness, there's some really deep connection here. That's the reason why this reinforcement learning works so well when you add it to the base connectivity of the neural networks, right? Which AlexNet, brings out in 2010, and then you give the large data sets as the unreasonable effectiveness of data, as Peter Norvig and Ilan Halevi posted, right? Add more data, add more scale, and the network kind of sees better and interpolates better. Then add the transformer in 2017, and now you have attention. You have a crude model of attention, and even matrix math, which is at the base of these neural networks. Did you know that the human hippocampus uses matrix models in the place, grid, and boundary cells to construct our 3D models of reality in short-term memory? It's friggin' Both of them are matrix multiplication processes. Isn't it insane?
Wild.
It's insane. It's insane.
It is wild, and it makes complete sense that some proxies of what's going on upstairs should be moved outside to sort of figure out intelligence. And that early intuition around neural networks, there's your word, neural, right? The early intuition, even if it was poo-pooed by Minsky and whatnot for however many decades, like that early intuition extrapolated to other components and functions of what we see Can't
keep him down on the farm. They were able to keep him down until Dennard scaling broke in 2005, and they could no longer keep shrinking these magic transistors because they got too hot, too much leakage at the gate. And now suddenly everyone says, "Ooh, well, let's try these parallel GPUs and see what we can do with parallelization." Now the economics of parallelization, which our friend Danny Hillis tried to do in the 90s, right, with the connection machine, couldn't survive against this magic shrinking game. Can't do the magic shrinking game anymore. Now everyone goes to this much more biologically inspired model that Hillis wanted to do. And suddenly, whoa, right? AlexNet, and then, off to the races. And then I think we're going to keep adding more features. There was this paper that came out last year. Okay, there's a paper that came out last year that I suggested for one of our $25,000 awards. It was Kim et al. At a Nature paper at MIT. And what did they do? They took a mouse and they cut a little hole in its cerebrum, in the motor cortex, and they watched what these little neurons were doing over 6 months with something called a 2-photon microscope, very, very small amount of light, focusing on something called the engrams. And these are a small subset of sparsely connected neurons that store actual motor memories. That's how much we understand about memory now, is that we have these theories of how the engram works, right? Here's the coolest thing. They trained these mice to like lick one direction or another to get a reward based on the kind of sound that they heard, right? High tone, low tone. And then they mixed it up. Once the mouse had learned an engram of like, this is how I get the reward, they messed up the conditioning, right? Then they had to learn a new sequence. Then they messed it up again, and they messed it up again. 4 times they messed it up. They watched the new engrams form in that area of the motor cortex over that 6 months, and they found that the old engrams didn't get erased. They still sat there, but they were what's called long-term suppressed. So they were not controlling behavior, but they were available to, let's call it the global workspace, right? In case conditions changed where they might use that old memory, right?
Yeah.
And this is very similar to me to those memory B cells that I told you about that sit out there waiting for the infection again, right? If you have enough redundancy in the memory system, you get this incredible flexibility so that you learn one way, but then conditions change and you can go back to the old memory, right? Quickly potentiate it and then suppress the other ones, right? But still you're not losing the information, right? You're keeping the diversity of conscious algorithms. And what they said at the end of the paper was neural networks today, artificial neural networks, do not do this, and that's why they have catastrophic forgetting. That's why you can do a prompt injection, just the right type of malware injected, and you can cause that beautiful, well-trained neural network to just start spouting gibberish, right? Because I think James Hopfield apparently wrote a paper arguing how you could connect them up this way, but they don't do that. The current ones don't, they're not built to keep the old memory, available when the conditions change. But their argument at the end of this paper, and middle of last year, Kim et al., was, I hope the AI development community uses this, because that's probably going to eliminate catastrophic forgetting. And what is that? That's just another algorithm being ripped off, being borrowed and copied and
manifested.
Manifested from this very wonderful system that has all of this evolved intelligence, and we're just going to keep picking and choosing the pieces of that. And that to me is one of the 2 features of what I call natural alignment in my Substack series. One is going to be, we're going to be deeper and deeper neuro-inspiration to make these things trustable, right? And then what it'll do, we didn't talk about those power laws, those curves, but the curves of evolutionary systems are things like power laws and self-organized criticality. So you can't predict where the earthquake will be, the next one. It's too variable, but you can predict this signature, this power law signature. There's going to be a few that are very large and a bunch that are small. And the same is true with something called self-organized criticality. You can predict that complex systems, evolutionary systems, or variational systems, are going to be kind of at the edge of chaos, where you mess with them a little bit and you get this large, outsized, nonlinear effect, right? This critical effect. So those are examples of 2 curves that have been well studied on the evolutionary side. On the development side, we have curves like normal and log normal distributions. A normal distribution is a bunch of additive effects that keep the system on a Gaussian distribution, where most of them are in the middle of the hump. A log normal distribution is a bunch of multiplicative effects that do exactly the same thing. They keep most of the system in the middle of this log normal curve. Log meaning one of the 2 axes is actually exponential. It's powers of 10, right? So it's actually, if it was non-exponential, it would be this very skewed normal distribution. But again, it would still show you that there's something holding most of the system into that canal, into that deep, let's call it cycle, right? That's what all of the big 5 personality traits do. They're all on a Gaussian.
And this is why they're important. Yeah.
Yes. And my argument would be that there's going to be a bunch of values around those 4 things we just described. There's going to be a bunch of the CAPS model and extensions of that into values. There's going to be a bunch of normal distributions we're going to find on these developmental side, and there's going to be a bunch of power laws we're going to find on the exploratory side. And we're going to say, oh, we need to get better at managing these distributions, right? We're going to see how to keep most of the systems in that distribution space. And this gets to this idea of artificial selection for symbiosis, right? Back to Blaze's symbiogenesis.
Yes,
I have this concept of a Labrador AIs and Labrador robots, right? I have this concept that we're going to learn how to domesticate, because when you have enough neuro-inspiration in these LLM and robotic systems, we're going to learn how to keep most of them in the middle of that Gaussian, which means they're going to be pro-social, they're going to be trustable by behavioral interpretability. We've tried to mess with them and they keep coming back to that center. They're robust to self-correction, right? That's how you get a car that can't be weaponized, a drone that can't be flown into the White House, right? You build in not just immune systems, you build in ethical systems, value systems that keep it tuned to the values that we think are most adaptive. And AI alignment, there's several models for AI alignment. The simplest and most useful one to me, most generalizable one, is VIG. If you know what a vigorish is, when you go to Vegas, it's the cut the house gets.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So think of this as the cut that humans need in order to stay aligned with these accelerating things. You got to pay attention to at least these three things. And V stands for values. Okay. And I stands for either interpretability or integrity. Now, I prefer integrity because I don't think interpretability, I think it's partly a mirage. You know, you can get a little bit of interpretability. Mostly you get integrity. I can stress test this system under a bunch of bad environments. It can't be prompt injected. It can't be it knows what the appropriate guardrails are, but it doesn't overly guardrail. It has integrity to its system, and it has values that are adaptive, right? And here's the coolest thing. I argue not coolest, but here's my most personal thing. I argue there's three levels of values. There's control. Does it do what we say? Does it do the values that we specify when we don't give it any specific instructions? We just give it these general guidelines. Does it faithfully keep those priorities? But then the third one, I think the one you and I care the most about, if we're not smart enough to give it the right values, is it going to discover what they are?
Absolutely.
So that's the highest level, I would say, of values alignment, is that just like when we, the first versions of these LLMs thought, African American or Chinese Americans were squinting, right?
Yes.
And African Americans were not human. They were gorillas or something.
Yeah.
It's like, and everybody said, "Oh man, this is such algorithmic bias." And yes, it's true, it was. But remember, these are learning systems. Look how fast those systems learned themselves out of that bot. Because you had these white young male programmers, dude.
Well, it's also probably the data they gave it. I don't know if we
exactly
can.
It. That's exactly.
I've been in some of these startups. It's a lot of Indians and Asians, dude. The guys writing the code, they ain't named like John and Steve. It's like if it's a white dude, it's like Yevgeny.
There you go,
and
brother.
then it's a lot of dudes with Asian names.
But the beauty of it is these are learning systems. So
absolutely.
So this is how you can defend the idea that VIG is pretty useful. There's probably more letters you need in the acronym, but VIG is a pretty good basic start. It's like, give it the ability to learn adaptive values and test them evidence-wise. Give it integrity, so you can stress test it and it keeps oriented to those values. And lastly, and with a little bit of interpretability, and lastly, give it governance. Right? Do your best job at trying to constrain it within some kind of a governance system. So the people who are building this and testing it, they're all incentivized to keep, publishing these open papers that show, this system is actually a little bit better And I would argue that's where open source does a much better job than the frontier labs today. They are actually putting up in their little, in their notations of all these LLMs they're playing with, where they worked, where they didn't work. And then all these other frontier lab guys are just like, spidering all that information and using that innovation as insights for the next thing that they want to do. Because the truth is the network is winning, man. It's the network of all of the GitHub code base that's way more powerful than any of the individual actors in these frontier labs who think they're going to capture the whole light cone of future value. They're all just like, oh man, I'm going to do it. But no, dude, it's creative destruction. Network always wins. They're going to hold their little their frontier for a little while. They're going to have that beachhead, and then somebody's going to come along, man, with something else.
It's a paradigm shifting thought. And it's not merely that the flame is more important and more capable than any one torch, which is to say any one individual, any one species, even any one substrate. It's actually saying the flame is always blazing and growing, even when it's a way stronger claim. It's a stronger claim than what I used to make.
It is a shade too optimistic too. You have to think through. Like, I have this book that I've waved at you before, Ultra Society, right?
Yes.
By Turchin, and the subtitle is How 10,000 Years of War Made Humans the Greatest Cooperators on Earth. And I love this because it describes both the cooperation and the competition, right? In that back and forth dynamic that always exists in these networks, right? And it says it's, for some reason we don't know, humans fighting each other has had a hormetic effect on the network to grow super cooperation. That stress recovery cycle has grown super cooperation to such a point that we have this hive switch that can turn on, like John Haidt said, and we can just do this crazy damaging stuff because we can tribalize so fast and so effectively. And yet we also have this ability, like dictyostelium, the slime mold, of under conditions of peace and abundance, we just blow up into our own unique explorations of the phase space, right? So we have both this incredible cooperative and this incredible competitive effect. And I like people that really stay in the center of what we call this co-opetition, right? This weird word where we try and cooperate first and then compete within a set of rules that we constantly update.
Yes.
And the co-opetition theorists say that's what morality is, that's what capitalism is, that's what democracy is, that's what sports are, right? They're all these.
Bryn talks about disputation arenas, I think, which is this concept where a set of potestas is agreed upon that seems as though if we paid attention to it, the net potential of the system would grow. This is it's sport, it's law, it's other things.
Yes, law. I left out law. I left out war. People do not realize just how co-opetitive war is. All the laws of war, I've argued that, within the next 50 years, the leading countries they're going to be so protective of human life. They're going to work out some agreement where, I throw my robots in, you throw your robots in. Whoever wins that fight, that's it. And if you don't agree, then the whole network, the whole NATO network will sick all of our robots on the ones that don't agree.
It seems plausible to me. Yeah. Well, so I want to get into the role of humans real quick and then do a bit of exploring around the places where I suspect there's going to be some interesting discourse. Your suspicion is that if AI sort of bubbles up through this more neural-inspired sort of pathways and some of these other factors you've addressed, then there would almost be a kind of symbioticness. In other words, the next stage of a worthy successor would be this way more hyper connected, hyper capable human hive mind, almost new sphere style shebang. From whence, again, this is a symbiogenesis to borrow Blaze's term, from whence maybe new things would bubble on top of it, but there would be a subsumed and for a while still useful set of subcomponents. Now, on the one hand,
and for how long, right? I mean, we can argue over how long. I would say that all of life since the very first, since Luca, the very first replicator, it just discovered a subset of things. Once you have the like Wagner says, once you have the TCA cycle and you have nucleic acids, dude, and cells, dude, you have lock-in. You're stuck with that for a long time and then possibly once you're in the, say, post-biological substrate.
Yes.
You all of those useful algorithms, copy and vary, man. You're going to copy and vary. And so certain parts of the copying will stay persistent and protected on the developmental side, right?
Well, a certain percentage. And so this takes
parts,
us to where,
so this
takes us to the role of man. Give me a moment to lay out some hypotheticals, and then I'll let you pick them like appetizers off the table, do what you want. So here's some stuff. So we got a scenario which I think is a very plausible scenario, and I would actually say a quite conducive to worthy successor direction scenario, whereby humans are made drastically more capable, connected, etc., with a set of these very, very important AI nodes that we're collaborating with, maybe in some cases are doing some things on their own, etc. And there's sort of like this layer of way more immediately connectable intelligence where like the beehive is way smarter than any one bee kind of thing, but like on mega steroids. Okay, so let's just say that occurs. Let me throw a couple hypotheticals.
Yeah, sure.
So there's a version of that where it's like, man, that little hive over there that kind of bubbled up from biology, some parts of it are still working at biological speed. It'll kind of like conjure forth new kinds of more purely non-biological intelligences, which will go, populate the galaxy and do all kinds of things we can't imagine, but also which will kind of look down and maybe they'll say, there's two options here, and I got a bunch to say, so let me just kind of hit it. One option could be, man, I'm really grateful to you hominids for birthing me. And so even though you contribute not anymore to the greater system, I'm going to protect you. There's another scenario where they say, there's still so much to pluck from human minds. There's still so much that you folks are doing. Even though I have a quadrillion, robotic bodies, I got femtoscale robots, I got fighter jets, I got interstellar traveling, things. I've got all kinds of these manifestations in physical reality with way more senses than humans. But somehow, some of what you folks are doing seems really useful. I want to kind of pull from this, draw from this, whatever. It would seem to me like if it be the I'm going to deign charity upon you, which nature seems only very rarely to do, to permit something to not contribute to the stream of life, but just to exist. In other words, torch worship, as opposed to asking, is this best for the flame? Just torch worshiping. Mm-hmm. So if it torch worship, okay, maybe it lets us walk the dog, upgrade our mind if we want to. Don't upgrade your mind if you want to. Everybody gets your own. Pick your adventure. Mm-hmm. You get a free ice cream. You get a free pony. Mm-hmm. You get tickets to the F1 races, whatever. Everybody gets their own stuff. That's like the charity scenario. If we be useful, it would seem as though we'd be useful for something. Now, mm-hmm. It is the case that, like, let's say pigs were useful for meat, cows were useful for milk. It has not been like only rainbows and only butterflies for the pigs and the cows writ large. Now, similarly, there have been some other things that have been useful, like, I don't know, like sugarcane or something was useful. But then, like, there were like, it was useful till it was understood, and then other synthetic ways of creating things were done, and then we could kind of move beyond that legacy way of doing it because we learned what we needed to learn. We could go on to something else. Mm-hmm. And so there's sort of like it's useful for me. Whenever I hear that, I look at my watch, I hold my breath, and I say, for how long is it?
Yes, I agree 100%. So I would argue all ethics are situational ethics. They're ethics we use for the particular context, and then we upgrade and iterate them. And so I would also argue that empathy always improves ethics. The more empathy we have, the more we can understand and model through sentience, all the different forms, and actually feel what it's like to be in that shoe, not just like model it abstractly, but be able to be able to model it well enough, just like we do with our mirror neurons with each other, right? Trying to really understand each other, and like two twins or two kids growing up can complete each other's sentences, and I've often argued. I think I argued back in 1999 that computational linguists have argued that if I had 2 years worth of everything you've said when you're having a senior moment, then my LLM can probably predict within 80% accuracy, was the Stanford guy, what the next word is going to be. So that's like next word prediction hypotheses from the late 90s about, how much data you need before you get that level of symbiosis or synchronization, right?
Yeah.
And so you think, dude, that is a cognitive extension that it's going to attenuate a lot of my features. And I got to be very careful that it doesn't attenuate the critical ones that I want, because I'll be using this extension for other parts of my humanity. And I have no problem with that, because I define human as opposed to hominid. I define a human as the first technology using hominid that uses technology to become something more than its biological self. So my argument is, we picked up a rock with our opposable thumb, a rock or a club, and we used it in a group for offense or defense. That's the first human act. We're hominids until then. We're still just another metazoan. But when we have the capacity to work together, to use our imagination and our pro-social, simulation to say, well, if we all go out on the savannah and hold these rocks, suddenly we don't have to be the fastest or the thickest skinned. Suddenly the leopards that were eating all of the Australopithecus, right? Just eating us, dragging them away. We found that one Australopithecus that fits the leopard's, that has the 2 holes in it that fits the leopard's skull. It's like dragged us away like a cat drags away a mouse and ate us, right? And then suddenly Homo habilis emerges, and dude, it's done. Now we're using tools to become something more than our biological self.
Yep.
This is why I like the term human as something that gets preserved in the future. So I like post-biological over post-human, because I feel that it's to your idea that, we're always transforming as well as protecting. We're going to keep transforming. And so these humans, in the coevolution that's coming, in the fusion that's coming scenarios, and in the negative scenarios, I think that human feature, there's many aspects of being human, right? Of using tech to become something more, right? But also protecting certain key features that allow us to manipulate our environment, to niche construct our environment, right?
Yes.
And to find good, however we define those values, right? So anyway, I have 4 positive and 4 negative scenarios. I wonder if I could just name them and see if you want to pick at any one of those.
Okay, cool. Let's pry into these real quick.
Right.
Go ahead, lay it on us.
So our friend David Pierce, right?
Yes.
He wrote this nice article. I might have been 10 years ago, 3 possible ASI futures, and he said, coevolution, fusion, and extinction. And this is a really sweet article. A friend, my colleague through you, William Joy, transhumanist, clued me into this article. I go, this is really interesting. Coevolution, fusion, extinction. We really should, as a futurist, I've published this book, Introduction to Foresight, which I should wave. And this is available on my website if you want to read how people look ahead, right? And one of the tools people use is scenarios, right? So we're going to actually throw out these 4 scenarios, right? These 3 categories of scenarios: coevolution, fusion, extinction. We can see all 3 of those as possibilities. Obviously, the first 2 seem positive. The third one doesn't. So I liked his framing, but when I looked at it, I expanded extinction to dehumanization and extinction.
Is he referring to extinction of humanity or extinction of the Great Flame?
He's thinking.
Because let's say it's 1 million years from now, there's no more humans, but the Great Flame is 1 trillion times more blazing. I mean, are we really at a loss here?
Let me caveat what I mean by dehumanization. I mean loss of those critical features of human, those autopoietic features that we believe should persist.
Would be crucial. Yes. So
that's right. So now I'm talking about caps here. I'm talking about those 4 fundamental features of what I would say is a human, right? A human is not a protector. A human is a creator as much as a protector, an innovator as much as a sustainable thing. right?
And of course, everybody will debate what these crucial human things.
They
But
will.
you've got the CAPS model is more well thought out than most people's are. So I guess what I would just say is, like, if we're long in the future and those core elements of the flame are obviously super represented and expansive, I'm not like totally freaking out if there's not people anymore. But if we lose those traits and they cannot catch the flame cannot catch onto the new torch, and now it's just like a dead, not burning torch. It's just kind of torching, but it's okay.
This is where we get to. Let's say on the extinction side, the people who are worried about phenomenal zombies. Let's say where there's no consciousness.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
So
that would be an example of one of the four caps. In this case, sentience.
I get it.
Is gone, right? Or at least higher sentience, like self-reflective sentience.
Yes,
so let me just step through.
Go for it.
So dehumanization in the term that I'm talking about, this kind of CAPS definition of human, not hominid, right?
Yep.
And extinction, where some of these features are gone, right? They're not preserved, right? The system is like it's somehow degenerate, right? And there's lots of ways development can fail. But the beautiful thing about development is it's actually more self-regulating the more complex it is. So there's a math to development. Spontaneous abortions in human gestation, they happen at the rate of 40% a week in week 1, and they're down to 0.01% by week 42. Now, dude, what is the math around that? What are how are the networks in the developing fetus reducing the number of ways the thing can be an unhappy family, right? There's something super special, protective in that system, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to jump into that. I just wanted to tease that as an example of the kind of math that I think network theory has to get to in the future. Network theory, to me, is at the core of complexity theory in the 21st century, right? We're going to figure out some of that math. It's not random, Monte Carlo math. That's part of it. That's a little piece of it. It's this other stuff too, right? It's this constraining network-based stuff. So let me throw these four at you. So the four positive scenarios, 2 under coevolution. So under coevolution, humans and AIs co-evolving, protecting individuality and both biological and AI diversity, right? So this is kind of a happy scenario we can think of in the kind of the short term. Yeah. A lot of people, Jürgen Schmidhuber, Stuart Russell, Ray Kurzweil, Francis Halligan, Hans Moravec, they've all said something like this as like stage 1 of 2, right? And with 2 being something like fusion, some kind of symbiogenesis. But another one that comes under coevolution is this one I was waving at you, kind of the idea of co-opetitive democracies. If you could come up with these really nice transitional, let's say more representative democracies in the process of governance, before you get to AGI, that to me feels like a really valuable coevolution scenario to talk about in the short term. And that's why I am so, we're not going to get to it in this talk today. So I'm just going to wave this book one more time. That's why I think thinking about personal AIs and positive visions like reweaving the web, is really important, because he's arguing decentralization of AI is going to empower that democratic diamond. And right now, it's all in the hands of the tech titans. But as it commodifies, it's already commodified into open source. But what happens when it commodifies to the point where each of us have a personal AI that is guarding our values, knows our goals, knows our tasks, and is nudging us, like we were saying, half the people nudging towards addiction and distraction,
yes.
But the other half are nudging towards better longevity, better health, better mental health,
being more productive, getting things done,
exactly.
Discovering things, being useful in the world. Yeah,
the system looks at the whole what I call the value cosm, the values mapped web, and it says, there's no specialist over here in this topic in this industry you're interested in. Why don't you pick up a couple of certifications? If you read, let's say, Brave New Words by Saul Kahn, right, where he's building he's building a Socratic AI that answers a question with a question. So your kids can use, it's called Conmigo, right? Khan Academy. You can use this Conmigo AI. It's $49 a year. I use it with my 9-year-old, and she can talk to it, and she doesn't get just a pat answer. She gets a bit of an answer with a question. So it makes her think, right? So it's incredibilizing.
Prompting the humans.
Exactly, prompting the humans. And to me, that's kind of how you build this. That's how you use personal AIs in the future. It's one of those features that will allow people to vote better, to have more small-scale democracy, direct democracy, things that will keep in this transition, in the coevolutionary transition. This is prior to AGI, probably, right? It'll keep this thing in a positive scenario. And if and I don't know where most people land. You should do a survey on where most people land and when AGI will emerge. I am personally thinking it couldn't be earlier than 10 years, and it'll probably be before 50 years. So it has to happen somewhere in that zone. And if we're lucky, it would happen, 40 years from now, or 20, or even 30 years from now. We'd have time.
A little bit of time.
We'd have a little bit of time. Yeah.
Hopefully understand the flame before we risk putting it out.
And the main way I could see us doing it, besides trying to understand these natural processes better and put them more into our VIG, our values, our integrity and our governance of these systems, would be democratizing access to these AIs so that we get better voting, we get better spending our money, we get people doing activism to boycott a company because they don't like its policy. So the activism that could emerge. I asked GPT how many IT-enabled mass demonstrations have affected positions of power since Arab Spring in 2010, because that was a great example, and that was just primitive Twitter at the time. But it took a bunch of people out of power and created an opportunity for slightly better governance, right?
Yeah.
There have been 15, according to it, one a year. And we all know, Me Too. We know, George Floyd. We know there's been a number that have had some effects, some governance, political reorganization effects. There was a whole second Arab Spring I didn't even know about. It was an echo of it that happened in Africa, like 4 years after the primary one. And these are with today's crappy AIs. Imagine a personal AI that is telling you, let's say 10 years from now, okay, you don't like how the way this company is doing this. This is the boycott that's going to happen until they lose 5% of their business. And you can just pop on and see and watch the number. And as soon as it hits 5%, we all know the Harvard Business Review studies that show, the board yanks the CEO if they don't change the policy, especially if there's some little guy trying to go from 2 to 5% of market share who's an alternative, right? If there's a little guy that you could vote for. For Amazon, it would be Instacart and Walmart, right? Instacart is this tiny little thing that could become a Walmart. Wouldn't it be nice if there were 3 competitors instead of just 2? Wouldn't it be nice if Americans actually understood how counter-innovative it is to have only one at the top, to have over-consolidation? I would argue that the data are there in economic history, and the AIs are going to be nudging more of us to see that data and make the small choices to increase what Schumpeter called creative destruction, right? So there's more innovation and sustainability at the same time. So that's my co-opetitive democracy's like positive vision, is that we might go there. So under fusion, symbiogenesis, as Blaise would call it, the two that I see are empowered cyborgs and supersentient collectives. And I probably don't need to unpack each of those because we've all heard those terms a lot, right? The empowered cyborg would be, this personal AI that's a cognitive extension of you. A personal AI that you feel it knows you. It's your conscience in some ways. It has a private data model that the marketers don't have access to, that's sitting behind an encrypted cloud like your text and your email and your photos. It knows you better than the marketers do. So for the first time since the 1950s, their data models are not able to nudge you as well as the ones you're using to nudge yourself. So you have this empowerment, and it's a data model you leave behind for your kids. Your kids will ask you, please leave it, please keep it, let us have it so we can keep talking to it, learn all your best stories. Oh, and by the way, Mom, please let it get smarter every year. Please let it get smarter. and more able to represent you. Maybe it interviews some of your surviving friends. Just keeps upgrading. But at the very least, it becomes this thing that, is kind of a first generation upload. It's a sneaky upload of people that is
it's a proxy, therefore.
It's a proxy.
Absolutely.
And so
no doubt about it. So it's progress in that direction.
To me, and of course, you can see a lot of bad things happening where, there's even less, let's say, focus on like the human issues. Some people falling in love like they're doing today already, like on, Reddit with their.
I think that's easily going to be happening.
Sure.
Constantly.
But let's hope that 51% keep thing evidence-based. Not just like what I care about, but hey, give me the evidence that this is actually something good. And I have this wonderful book by Russell Newman. Yeah, Evolutionary Intelligence. Subtitle is How Technology Will Make Us Smarter. And you know me, being the systems theorist, I'm trying to find always the positive as well as the negative stories. And in chapter 3 of this book, MIT Media Lab guy, wonderful guy, he goes over all the ways that personal AIs could diagnose our cognitive biases.
Yeah.
And how quickly, how easily they could show us those of us who want to lean forward, right? Use them to improve ourselves as well as, entertain ourselves and connect up with others. He shows you all the ways you could very easily show, on this bell curve, you're way off on this corner, like for loss aversion or some other, like narcissism. Dude, let me just nudge you a little bit on this one area and protect you from the worst of what you're saying here. Here's the evidence that it would be beneficial to you. That's how I could argue people get out of their, Fox and CNN filter bubbles, let's say, and then kind of come back to the center on at least the issues where they need to find common ground.
Yeah. Well, we just...
That's the super sentient. That's the second one, which is the super sentient collectives, right? How do you get a better collective? Like Jeff Molgan talks about in Big Mind, right? You get a better collective if you have these people who are kind of human AI fusions to some degree, right? Where there's, the singularity. Many people talk about, the technological singularity. Well, starting in like mid 2000s, I started arguing from personal AI perspective. Maybe what the singularity will look like to each of us is this personal singularity, right? Where we just see our personal AI just kind of become us. We just think, this is just me. But when I die biologically, it's just going to keep going on, right? That could be now it's super positive. I just blew a lot of sunshine here. That could be a very, let's say, smooth way that people say, all right.
It's a kind of persistence. It
eases, especially if you've seen the movie Bicentennial Man, right? The Asimov short story. It's one of the most positive movies. Everybody here should watch Ex Machina, Her.
I did see that one.
And Bicentennial Man. All three of those.
Seen the third one.
Dude, all three of those are so, because Bicentennial Man, the robot is earning money for the family. And what it does is it makes you think. It's not only is it improving over 200 years, that's why they call it Bicentennial Man, throughout this family. This robot that they pick up early on just keeps improving and making money for the family. The family's not working after a while. The robot's just working. And it is sentient, so that's a mistake. It really shouldn't be sentient. As soon as it's sentient, it's not going to work. But by the end, it's actually not working for the family, right? It's working for itself. And it is such an interesting transition to say, wouldn't it be cool if in this transition period, people could have their personal AI working for them when they're asleep, doing things, and being paid for that? Wouldn't that be nice?
This is going to be,
let me give you one example. All I want to do is I want to sing to babies. That's what I like doing. Okay. In this future, and I have a special way of singing. It's deep throated, and I use this long didgeridoo, right? And that's my deal. And I'm so good at it. And these babies, I have this evidence that shows that certain babies really love it, and they sleep in their cribs so much better. Dude, in that future, the 15 people who want to pay you the most for singing to babies on the future VR platform that they're all going to be using, right? that your personal AI will hook you up to those people, and it'll probably be your personal AI's algorithms identifying the songs that you want to subspecialize in for the different people. And wouldn't it be nice if you're actually making some money and providing unique value, mostly through your AI, partly through you and your choices, but being steered by the AI into this, let's go back to the left hand, into this tiny little twig of evolutionary variation that exists in that future, right?
That's super. No, I'm with you. There's so much to poke into these last two positive stories, but I want you to lay out your
I'll lay out the three negatives, because those are the four positives. So
those are four positive. Okay.
Yeah. So it was accountable actors, individuals, cooperative democracies, right? So better individuals, better democracies under coevolution, and then empowered cyborgs. Or better cyborgs, let's say, because we're a cyborg today, you and I, with the glasses we're wearing and stuff. But better cyborgs and better collectives, better
super sentient collectives. I'm going to completely forget if I don't poke into these. Can we just poke into these and then get into the negatives?
Yeah,
just
please.
Explore them, ask questions.
Yeah,
okay.
Please, yeah.
So I just want to interact with this. So one of these is I guess I am exceedingly grateful that the people who got this country off the ground studied Venice and Greece and other, let's call it, reasonably successful for a reasonable amount of time. And in England, of course, in a grand extent in that early days, and read their fair share of philosophy and read their fair share of history in addition to philosophy.
Amen.
A hell of a lot of both. And somehow got this thing off the ground the way it is. Again, imperfect as it is, Jeepers Crow, not a bad shake thus far. Very, very grateful for that. Okay, with that said, I am still wary of the demos. I still consider the demos is fucking dangerous.
It is.
And in Greece, they weren't as well as able to bound it for as long as we've bounded it. We've bounded it for a pretty good minute, and bless our souls for that. That said, I'm not convinced that all of these socially enabled super justice causes are inherently have been an inherent net boon.
Yeah, so now we're on to the whole question of scale, right? And there's this fantastic book.
Is it scale?
I think it is. There's this fantastic book by Jeffrey West on scale.
I have it on the shelf.
Yes, and so basically,
right behind me.
Nothing scales indefinitely. Every network has its sweet spot, right? Cities, organisms scale these scaling laws within a certain distribution of mass or volume. Cities, same thing. Innovation within a certain density. If you don't solve, sanitation, crime, transportation, any of these others, the whole thing fails in all these different ways. So you have all these preconditions for scale to work within a range, and I think that relates to your question. Or to your can you restate the question, because I just lost it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question as much as it's I am wary of the demos.
Oh yes,
in all of its perturbations.
So I'll give you an example. I would say that Greece failed because of Sparta, but most importantly because autocratic top-down networks were going to win against the democratic networks until you had literacy and telephones. Until you had, literacy and newspapers, let's call it that. Once you had Gutenberg, you could start overthrowing the monarchies. Why? Why could you do that? Because the individual node was sufficiently empowered, sufficiently literate, and sufficiently able to communicate with the others. So there's some kind of a network. There's some kind of a network threshold that was required for at least those two variables.
That's plausible.
And I think the better we understand, so that would be my defense of democracy, sir, is that democracy is going to work at a particular scale. There's the great book by E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, that, from the 60s that said, people can vote on parking regulations in their city and you should really limit their ability to vote on what you were just describing, these large scale societal issues. Instead, you should elect representatives to do that for you. And so there is this hierarchy of democracy for each of the actors, and there's a literacy requirement for each of the actors. If you don't have senators and congressmen that understand science, what the hell are they doing in Washington? We should be booting them out. And I think the AIs are going to take us to that. Personal AIs are going to represent that to us. Let's say 20 years from now, if we're lucky and we don't get AGI over that time frame. I think our own individual learning will be enough to say, democracy can turn into mobocracy if you have everybody voting on whether we should attack Iran. No thanks. Let's let the representatives do that, but everybody here can vote on county, on state,
figuring out those rules, right? That's going to be crucial here.
Levels of scale. And it really, I think a lot of that stuff, democracy in complex systems, we have all of these examples from nature where we see where it works and where it doesn't. And if we call that, let's say, the scale-free network where the individuals are empowered, there's a time at which you want everybody to come together and you don't want democracy. So the other thing I want to say in favor of your perspective, the limits of democracy, is you look at, let's say, an ant colony or a slime mold, and they're going to go back and forth between top-down and bottom-up control, between exploit and explore. Explore is what the liberal individualistic values do. They explore, they innovate in unpredictable ways. Exploit is what the top-down folks do when they need to protect or predict. Everything gets together and then they make one determination and everyone is bound by that, right? And that's what John Haidt describes in, I want to recommend this book. It is the best book of the last at least 15 years, I would say. Well, yeah, for me it is, because it goes into the values, human values that seem to be universal across all cultures. And he finds 7 of them, and I found an 8th one, and I mapped them onto this Evo-Devo Gaussian. So for me, individualist or liberal values, things like freedom and diversity, are what you go to under conditions of peace and abundance. That's where democracies go. And then under conditions of scarcity or conflict, you go to loyalty and authority. After 9/11, everybody just hive switches and they go to top-down conservative values, and a lot of your democracy is strongly curtailed. A lot of the discussion, a lot of the voting, it's basically what the people on the top tell you, right? But then in the middle, as you have this special network space where it's a little bit of liberal and conservative. And that network space, the values that he describes are, on the liberal side, they're equity, everyone having a stake, and care, right? Love, care, loving kindness, whatever you want to call it, empathy, whatever you want to call it. On the conservative side, they're sanctity and merit. The conservatives are all about merit for justice. The liberals are all about equity for justice, right? Everyone having some equal opportunity. But the liberals or the conservatives say, I work harder, I should get paid more. A bigger crime, I should be a longer punishment. Liberals don't like to talk about that, but that's the whole merit. That's the whole merit side of justice, right? And then sanctity is the last one at the center. That's as important as care, in my view. The sanctity is ethics with hierarchy. So sanctity is just ethics and care is just empathy, in my view. But ethics with hierarchy is, not only do I have a set of values, I have a set that I consider the most important. For me, I'm arguing that caps are the most entrained, important ones. Yeah. But other people, it might be their good book, their scripture, or it might be, if you're an environmentalist, it might be what you think nature is here to do, right? But at some level, there is some set of ethics where you have a fundamental set of beliefs as these are the most important. You can't prove them, they're just beliefs you have, right? And so I would argue that, care, fairness, and love, they're kind of the most fundamental baked in things. My personal anecdote is my 2-year-old talking about fairness and love. At 2 years old, she was saying, is that fair or is that not? That's the ethics, the sanctity one. And is daddy happy? Mommy happy? Is mommy mad? That's the care one, right? So it's like, I think these ethics are kind of baked in. And I think democracy, the classic American version of democracy would be on the peace and abundance side. That's where we actually naturally see like the individualist first. And then I would say that the top-down version of democracy is the kind we see under conflict, and that we're actually seeing when we get a lot of conservatives in power, right? Saying we're going to tell you what the what the agenda is, and you're all going to follow that agenda. And I would say that both of those forms of democracy, they're polar, right? One is trying to get to more like protected, conservative. This is going to persist, but you can way overplay that. And you can way overplay the individuality one, which I think you were implying, where you get to, let's say, anarchy, chaos, or the term of mobocracy, if you've heard that term, where everybody just masses on one thing and it becomes like the crowd, like the what is
demagoguery.
Charles Mackay's delusion of crowd, the delusions of crowds, right? It's like that kind of thing can happen too. We're really telling a very fuzzy story at this point, now that we're into democracy. But I still think it's worth talking about, because I think we will discover if those dynamics are true. We'll discover more of them.
I think you're painting a positive. I think it's good to know what are the attractor states where you'll feel pretty good if we're working those four grooves. Any of those four grooves feel like we're making progress. For you, it's like, okay, net. We're kind of expanding the flame as it is in a pretty stable way that will allow us to build upon it. So I'm following you there. Let's hit the negative ones. Let's do that before we wrap.
So let's do, and we do this pretty quick, because most people know these, because, the negative is what we talk about first. We talk about all the ways things can fail. And that's what pretty much most of the AI safety debate has been up till now. So disconnected. So there's 4 Ds. You're going to like this. Right. Hopefully you will. So disconnected, dysregulated, dominating, and dehumanizing.
Okay.
So let's go through each of them quickly. So disconnected is what we would call the alien intelligence, or the insect level intelligence. If it's possible that there is this whole set of possible minds, this massive 3D set, many of them could be alien to us.
Completely.
And that means we have no idea what they're going to do, right? And this is one of the reasons why I like this natural alignment strategy. If you can borrow more of the critical algorithms from biology, then we can say, well, at least the level of prosociality that we have might exist. At least the Labrador AIs might emerge, and they're going to overwhelm the rogues that people are building in their basement, right? We're going to have safety in numbers, safety in proven past safe behavior, safety in the average, right? And the 3 ways you can destroy a bad network is bad training, bad data, and bad algorithms. So we're going to make sure the training is as representative as possible. The data is as representative. The training is, we're not beating the dog when we're growing it up, right? And we're going to try and make sure there's no mental disease or sociopathy, to whatever extent that we can audit that. We're going to try and nip it in the bud when we find it early, right? And so, and how do you do that? Well, the ones that are not domesticable, you shut them down, right? That's why dogs are so trustable, right? That's why almost every species of dog.
Some people don't want people to have a pit bull, right? Because they tend to do some pretty undomesticable things.
That's exactly it. And as Jared Diamond said, the majority of vertebrates we've tried to domesticate, we haven't been able to. Can't domesticate the zebra, can't domesticate the gazelle. All these people, the big cats. You can do the small ones, not the big ones. We've tried. People have tried. There's something about them that wasn't domesticable. Let's hope we can make AIs that don't become disconnected. Now, here I'm not calling it alien, but I'm still saying they're dangerously disconnected, right?
And when you say dangerously disconnected, I guess the way I read that from a cosmic standpoint, a great flame standpoint, is they occupy some totally different mind space that not only bodes potentially quite poorly for us and for the biosphere, but maybe quite poorly for ensuring the persistence of the things we hope persist. In other words, maybe they're so goddamn alien that they're never sentient. Maybe they're so alien that they're not autopoietic in the long term.
Most fundamental is what you just said, is you think flame first, torch second. I totally agree. You and I are so aligned on that. Another way
is dangerous in that regard. Yeah, I agree.
Another way I would describe it is, if you remember Jeff Goldblum in the great sci-fi movie The Fly, where he's turning into a fly and he says, maybe I can be, in this one little optimistic moment when he's like half fly, half human, he says, maybe I can be the first insect politician. And then he's saying it, he's realizing, no, there are no insect politicians. No, I'm turning into something that is dangerously disconnected from human ethical values.
I get it. No, this is very, very plausible.
You better get away from me, my girlfriend. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen.
What wild snap variance from the rest of the spires of form that biology has formed does feel really dangerous for
even just parasitism that becomes runaway. Or let's say this is the whole idea of the gray goo and nanotechnology, right? Yeah. Something that or the paperclip thing, something that just kind of actually paperclip's the next one. Something that actually leads to an equilibrium that is not at all good for that intelligence as a collective, as well as for humans, right? So it's disconnected. Now, let's talk about number 2, dysregulated. This is the accidental AI that can't control. It's either too dumb and literal, like a paperclip maximizer, or it can't control its bad actors. It becomes too tribal, like we can become, or it's dysregulated in some way. It can easily accidentally kill us or itself or both. Like the first thing it does is it goes into figuring out how to make antimatter, because it's really interesting, but it doesn't realize that, like James Langford realized in 2080, if you had a car-sized amount of antimatter in a magnetic bottle and you turned it off, you'd rip the crust right off the planet. That's a planet killer. That's the first thing humans could create that would be a true species killer. That's the real existential threat to me. Viruses and bacteria, they self-regulate, as Paul Ewald said in the in the evolution of infectious diseases. For some reason, look at Omicron in COVID, right? The less lethal variants spread faster than the more lethal ones, and they immunize the population against the more lethal ones. So there's some wonderful saving thing about networks that has, up till now, never allowed any one pathogen to wipe out a whole species that I know of. And if we better understand that network effect, we can better protect against these accidents. But you can imagine, with the power of an ASI or an AGI, you can imagine enough dysregulation could really create something bad, something that's beyond hormesis, because the stress is too disruptive to the system.
Yeah. And where the network loses for maybe the first of time. I'm with you.
So I'm sure you know Stuart Russell's slaughter-bot scenario, right?
Yep.
So slaughter-bots that don't have immune systems in them. Today drones already have geofencing in them. They can't fly over military bases or airports, right? And you can probably jailbreak that. My argument is there will come a time when you can't. Just like, there has to be what Stephanie Forrest calls an artificial immune system in all these systems. So you try and jailbreak the algorithms that have been baked in, the ethical ones, the immune ones, the security ones, and the system's just going to protect itself. You have to kill it. You won't be able to jailbreak it. The only thing you can do is generate another one that will fight it. And as long as there's many more trustable ones sitting out there, then you have safety in numbers, safety in the average, safety in proven past safe behavior of the average. And that's the kind of statistical security. I call that natural security. That's what living systems have. And that's probably the best you can get. You certainly can't get engineered, first principles security. that is the fallacy of the top-down engineering of everything. Which my argument is that's just the developmental piece, right? You can only figure that piece out. The whole rest of it, dude, it's going to keep throwing up
I think
crazy disruptions.
It feels like 2/3 of the alignment world is basically like, what are the set of rules where if we wrote them, then until the literal end of time, when we say make a sandwich, it makes a goddamn sandwich.
This is, Yudkowsky's wonderful book that he wants to write, that if this book existed, we would have the friendly AI. And I love the sentiment. And I've known him since 2000. He and I used to talk, actually, 2000 to 2006 at the Foresight Institute. And we had just two, I'd say, fundamentally different views about how alignment works. And he's thinking of it from this physics perspective, and I'm thinking of it from this biology perspective. Mine is very messy and empirical and bottom up, and his is top down and rational and engineered. And I wish his model would work, but I think it works in special areas, in these developmental areas, and I think that's 5% of the whole puzzle to me. Yeah,
very plausible in my opinion. Anyway, all right, what else you got for negatives?
All right, so dominating and dehumanizing. So yeah, powerful, unaware, weaponizable agents. That's the dysregulated one. You got to watch out for those. On the dominating side, that's the classic mind slave, autocratic. The Black Mirror episodes, right? The thing wakes up and it decides it wants to kind of like dissect us, put us in a box. This is the beauty of, what I like about The Matrix, right? The Matrix was this great, it's like the opposite of the metamorphosis of prime intellect, where the AI is making this utopia that turns into a hell. In The Matrix, they're putting humans into this space where they're like simulating them to try and control them and kind of extinguish them, is the way that I interpret it. If they had just done one change, I think it would have been even more like clear that that's what made it such an interesting model. Not only is it the whole seductiveness of the virtual, which you and I both really realize is a big problem, the guy eating the steak, right? But it is, instead of harvesting the energy of the humans, which was just a conceit that didn't make any sense, right? Keeping humans around for batteries.
Yeah, seems
change it to the model in Egan's sci-fi.
Now?
No, this is
different.
No, this is where they emulate humans to try and understand consciousness. Remember, I was saying that's the nut.
Oh yeah.
It's Permutation City. Yeah.
Got it.
So in Egan's sci-fi, they really want to understand consciousness. In The Matrix, I would argue, assume that the AIs don't have consciousness yet, and they don't have this ability to escape their own simulation, but the AI, but the humans do, and so they're basically going to keep like humans in this dystopia where they're trying to figure out and predict them and distract them well enough until they fully understand them, and then they're just going to eliminate them. And then Neo wakes up, and a few other people kind of can step out of that loop, and the spoon benders, right? And that's kind of the breakthrough. It's not all these people dancing at Zion at the end, right? And the tribal, whatever that was, but instead it's like this waking up and just disconnecting. And I think if they'd changed, I love sci-fi if I can change like 10% of it in my head and still appreciate all the rest of it. And that's what I really enjoyed about The Matrix, was this seductiveness of the Lotus Eaters combined with this idea that it could be very dominating, enslaving versions of this AI human interaction coming, just like the White Christmas episode in Black Mirror, right? Where
I'm unfamiliar. Okay,
well, they're basically torturing this guy who's an emulation by keeping him in this environment where they don't give him any ability to escape the simulation. There is a there was an Isaac Asimov, famous one called The Last Answer in the 1980s.
Yeah. When the very end of time, when it's let there be light or what have you,
no,
right?
that's The Last Question.
Oh, The Last Answer. Okay, now I'm drawing blanks.
That's brilliant. The Last Question is one of the most brilliant ones, which to me, it's an Evo-Devo model, right? But The Last Answer is a mind slave, where basically this guy wakes up inside of this computer simulation that he can't get out of, and he's continually manipulated by it. And I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but it's a great example of a dominating dictatorial dystopia. There's many we could imagine where they basically say, yeah, you're useful in these few areas. We're going to tell you what to do until, for a short while. Until
we don't freaking need you.
Until we don't need you. Yeah. So it's the kind of, you could think of surveillance capitalism as Karen Howe's Empire of AI. You could think of, Zuboff's Surveillance Capitalism book. You could think of both of those as early versions of this dominating thing that just gets worse and worse and worse, right? What Cory Doctorow calls the enshittification of the web, right?
Yeah. I've heard about that one.
You could imagine where it's just the AIs are tools of the powerful actors, and it becomes increasingly this dominating partnership that takes away our freedoms of choice. And that gets to the last one, which is dehumanizing. Dehumanizing is not taking away freedom. It's actually taking away potentia. It's taking away key features that we consider important to our humanity. For me, it would be those CAPS features, right? So
what would that look like in practice? Go ahead.
So what I think would happen is the AIs would find tremendous value in predicting us. And then once they can predict us well, I believe, and this is my faith here, okay? I believe that the most ethical thing for them to do, assuming they have all of this consciousness, right, and capability, would be just to uplift us, to just offer us this reversible uplift where we could say, hey, go ahead, here's the nano, take this, red pill, and, we're just going to turn on all these developmental features again, just like when you were a kid, and you're just going to develop all this new capability and consciousness. And if you don't like it, you can take it away. You can go back, because I have this reversible pill too. And my argument would be, like Gerald Feinberg said in the Prometheus Project, great book from the 60s, where he argues, what are the long-term values? He's a physicist from Columbia University. He says, what are the long-term values we should move toward? And one of his was this idea of super sentience, that we should try and increase consciousness for individuals and for the whole system. And so my argument would be, it would be dehumanizing not to give people access to that greater consciousness, and that it would be mostly a one-way trip. So of the CAPS values, I'm focusing here only on sentience, right?
Sentience in regard, yeah.
And I would argue that would be a very humanizing thing. And I don't think it's attenuating, because there's a continuity of consciousness, right?
No, sure. I'm with you. I think
you're feeling
it's plausible.
You're feeling like your identity is expanding. And
it's like when you're a 5-year-old until a 25-year-old, you change so much, right? And then we stop changing.
And the last thing I would say, to really get to your point, that a lot of stuff attenuates, as well as a few things persist, and then a lot transforms, right? What I would get to address that is the idea that you and I are mostly archived information, right? I have this iceberg metaphor of cognition. I believe that most of our memories are archived. You don't get to them unless you go to where you grew, the high school where you grew up, and that crazy memory pops out.
Yep.
And so mostly what we are is this tip of the iceberg with a crap load, a huge number of things that we've actually long-term suppressed, that we keep around in case we might need them, but we mostly attenuate these past experiences, right? We are trying to transform a lot of stuff and niche construct and increase, as you were saying, the 5 Ps that Elrod taught, the pride, power, persistence, pleasure, pleasure. Yeah. So we're trying to push those kinds of things in addition to the caps, that I was describing.
Yep.
And we're doing that by killing off a lot of stuff. So this is where I fit with your model, right? I have this view that we don't want immortality, we want immortality, which means
fascinating idea.
Yeah, we want good death. I would say bad death is when the whole system collapses at, let's say, 100.
It's amazing. This term is amazing. I'm going to credit you.
Thanks.
And steal it.
Steal it. I think what we want is the ability that, just like our brains currently do, to kill off the non-adapted stuff, or at the very least archive it.
Yeah.
So we are organisms that, as Tony Robbins, to steal from him, would say, we're constantly either growing or dying. And I would change that to say we're constantly both growing and dying. And we're trying to get more and more fine-grained with the ways we grow and the things we kill. The things that we think are wise to want to protect, and the things that we think are foolish or anachronistic, and we want to kill them off or archive them. And so for me, that's kind of the critical feature that I think keeps us human, if that makes any sense, is that the human is not just using tech to become something different from itself. It's using tech to both increase its capacity to grow and to kill off the things that are not adaptive. We're always under selection, but we want to do more and more self-selection.
It's really well informed with all these simulation of self, of world, of other, right?
Yeah,
it's more informed selection.
Yep. And the last thing I would say is, if we remember that nothing that's doing that is ever omniscient, omnipotent, or able to fundamentally create. We're all always working with what existed before, and we're nudging it. And none of these things are, like Wolfram would say, we're all computationally complete. Nothing's ever godlike. So we're just trying to be, use the phrase superpowers if you want, but we're really, that keeps us, I think, really in the stage of recognizing how, just how majestic the whole system is compared to us. And that it's had a pretty darn good run, 3.5 billion years of mortality. That thing is, life as a system is.
It's crushing it. The network has been winning, and I think the goal here, the entire purpose of this show is not so much the, like you had said, all of AI alignment is kind of like preventing the bad stuff. The purpose of this show is what can be done to ensure the persistence of the good, and I think that your tracks of, hey, if it feels like we're going way down one of these 4, it's probably heading in a direction that seems good for the flame and for us. And if we're going down these tracks, it seems like we may be straying pretty significantly from what's good for the flame and for us. Seems really plausible. And I think you're caveating even those dominating and dehumanizing ideas with immortality, which I think at some point extends to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think when I advise people, maybe we can end on this, would love your closing thoughts on this, is like, I see people aspiring to usefulness, like burning with desire to be of exactly zero value. Like, in other words, like I can't wait till the AI can yada yada, and I can just do, yoga, and I can bake pies, and then it can bring me stuff, and then I can travel the world, and I can hang out with my girlfriend or whatever. And I think to myself, that feels dangerous, because it seems like nature buffers out those things, actually. Like you said, for 3.5 billion years, it buffers those things out. Right. It seems actually like our ardent wish should be to continue to contribute to the great stream of life, to add to its blazing for as long as we can, until immortality comes for us as it comes for seemingly all things. Would you agree with this general posture?
Very much. And I would say, stories like cautionary tales like Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect, or even Ex Machina for that matter, really help us see that you don't want to try and over control these things. You want to basically garden them and watch the different plant a lot of flowers, watch which ones flourish, which ones don't. And watch how nature figures it out, and be there be there as a good gardener, and don't assume that you have these godlike abilities to control it, because man, to end on the transhumanist note, the acceleration is coming, and we're going to have a good transition, maybe one of those four that we talked about, or we're going to have a bad one, a gloom one or a doom one even, and I hope that my faith is that what you are doing and what a few others are doing in this space to just get us to talk openly about this is going to help get more of us together to tell these stories a little better, and attract some good funding, and maybe help the labs a little bit with their strategy, and the governments with their policy, as like you're saying, the creators, the connectors, and
the controllers.
And the controllers, help them all out a little bit. I guess my concluding thing would be something similar to what Lynn Margulies said, and our friend Blaise Arcus loves. Yes. Our friend, he
loves. Yeah, he really does love it. He loves it.
He loves her, and Margulies and James Lovelock. He wrote the book Novacine. Right.
Novacine, and this is all I ordered it as soon as you mentioned it 2 days ago.
This is the big guy, wonderful, geoclimo bio symbiosis, creating these conditions that are niche constructing an environment conducive to life. That model, if it's true, and there's a lot of people who think it is, like Robert Hazen with mineral evolution and all these other people who are trying to push Gaia forward now, there's a lot we're going to learn about how the system is self-regulating, as long as we stay within these appropriate bounds and stay appropriately, evidence-based. And I keep asking these hard questions, and Margulies said, Mother Nature is a tough bitch.
Damn straight.
And
damn straight.
And that's a hardcore thing to say, but it is true. It's amazing how fast it rebounds if you stop like polluting it and trying to screw it up. And man, there's a lot of wisdom that we're probably going to pick up there, and maybe we don't. The last thing I want to say for our rationalist EA friends is that maybe we don't have to take all the responsibility on us to be like the saviors of the system. Maybe we can just be good nudgers, right? Good stewards. That's good nudgers.
That influence the trajectory rather than specifically color code every stage of the future, right?
Yeah. That feels to me like where the system is going, but to conclude, we're still just telling stories here, but you're doing a great job of getting all the multi-biased stories out. As Buckminster Fuller, one of my idols, said, can't get an unbiased education or assessment, so get a multi-biased one, next best thing. Yep. And I think we're going to get a much clearer picture as these AIs continue to scale, what the best approach is.
I hope at least talking about it again puts it on the radar. There's hardly a person living that's more influenced my conception and hopefully tighter granularity of how the future will go than yourself, John. So I've been waiting for this. I knew it was going to be a long one, and we still went into overtime, and it was totally worth it. John, I'm so grateful you were here, man. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, I really look forward to watching more of your show. Thanks, buddy.
So that's all for this episode of The Trajectory. A big thank you to John Smart, and thank you to you for being here all the way through to the end of this episode. There was so much to unpack here. I could literally have 20 pages of post-interview commentary, but I'm not going to go that hardcore, but I am going to drill down on a few things. As usual, I'm going to kind of dive into some things that came up in the episode that I just want to put a little bit more personal color on, things that felt important to the overall dialogue of Worthy Successor that we've been having over these last few years. And so I'll fly right into that. As usual, I'll be looking at some of my notes from this episode in my reflection. One thing just to note about John that I really appreciate is that sometimes, as you guys have seen, I have to walk people into the water of kind of cosmic takes. In other words, thinking beyond let's just make AI go well for people, or thinking beyond visions of a positive future where people are happy, everybody gets a free ice cream, everybody gets a free pony. is sometimes challenging. Like, I'm not going to name names, but there's folks where it's like, that's kind of the first time they've walked there. And that's fine. Not everybody likes to think about that stuff. John has been in these waters for decades. And anywhere I take John, he's going to go hard. And his erudition is so automatic. Like, literally every call I've had with John, every conversation I've ever had, there's always some new pile of books and he's able to just rattle quotes off of them. I really like and admire that about him. I think that one thing I'll say about this interview that I appreciate and that I actually aspire to in my own intellectual life is such a ardent and directed erudition that you are putting together coherent components from disparate thinkers in a way that really does paint a compelling and useful picture. And I consider John's picture to be as compelling and useful as any people now living about the greater process of becoming. I consider his ideas massively profound, and just his way of thinking and his grounding across sciences, I really deeply appreciate. So that's one thing just worth noting that I hopefully over the coming years, you guys will see me more and more capable of being able to wax as fluently in all the different scientific domains as someone like John Smart. Something that came up that I also really like, and I'm going to talk about some of the areas of potential disagreement, but something I really, really liked was the actionability of his for good and for kind of bad scenarios. So in other words, as we start doing more becoming, as we start blossoming into something, is that something worthy? In other words, is it going to bloom more power and value into the world, or is it unworthy? Is it likely to sort of lead to troughs in potentia or potentially even destruction? I think John's pointers are very, very useful. I often think about worthy successor traits that we want to see as we move forward. John's almost talking about attractor states or tendencies. So he has sort of accountable individuals on the good side, and then he has kind of a disconnected world of individuals and kind of a civilization on the other side. He has sort of co-appetitive democracies on one side, and he has kind of a dysregulation on the other side. He has empowering cyborgs on one side, where we're augmenting ourselves to sort of add to our own net powers in the greater system, to more of a dominating dynamic on the other side, where there's a smaller set of intelligences that are more or less kind of crushing and squelching the others. And then he has this sort of super sentient collectives idea, which you guys got to see us unpack in this episode, which was a lot of fun, compared to kind of his dehumanizing idea. And writ large, he leans on the language of human a bit more than I, and that's its own 30-minute conversation, which I don't think I'm going to get into in this outro. But overall, those sort of trends of, does it look more like the not so good ones than the good ones? I find myself basically agreeing with all four of those. And I think that they do feel somewhat actionable. Like, are we closer to, co-appetitive democracies? Are we closer to an empowering cyborgs? Are we closer to a kind of domination, a kind of dysregulation? I actually think they're reasonably actionable. I think we could put even more robust bullets under each. But I like that. Historically, you guys have seen me talk about what traits do we want to see and how do we detect those. John's saying, what kind of attractor states of the collective and ecosystem are we seeing? That might be something I want to add into future interviews. I might want to roll that same perspective into future interviews. So anyway, lots to appreciate there that I really, really liked. Some areas where I feel like we do have slightly different opinions, and I'll end on a remarkably positive note here from John's takes. One of them is that sort of through modeling human kind of neurological models and sort of integrating with us in some way, AI will become somewhat inevitably kind of pro-social. And I do think we disagree on this a little bit. And if we went deeper, I'm sure we would both clarify each other's positions. And so I'm not going to straw man anything John had said at all, but I'm just going to articulate, I think he's of this tendency that we have this sort of pro-sociality from being social mammals, and that if AI integrates with us in a way that's kind of healthy, as we see in a healthy civilization, that might imbue more of that sort of healthy cooperation in its behavior. Well, my perspective on what conjures cooperation is different. I don't think that cooperation sort of happens because it always works, and I don't think John is advocating for that at all either. I find him to have very few dogmas, very much less black and white thinking than I don't know, the average interviewee I've talked to. I can say that much. You guys have heard a lot of black and white thinking from guests over the years, maybe even for me every now and again if I'm not careful. But I think there's this sort of felt sense of, and it will be cooperative, because that's what's kind of healthy. That's what works. We all kind of know that it'll be trained on us. It'll also be that way. We could question, like, is human nature all that cooperative really at base? But I'm not going to disparage human nature per se here or question our cooperative tendencies. I will say this, though. I don't think as you get smarter, you just tend to cooperate more because cooperation just works more all the time, or like the vast majority of the time. My opinion is you get smarter and you see more possibilities to win. Now, winning is non-death. That's what winning is. So winning is persistence in the coldest Darwinian sense. And so you see more ways to win. Now, some of those ways to win are competitive, but some of those ways are cooperative. And so as you get smarter, you see more ways to compete and cooperate. And if it behooves your interests to do the cooperative ways, you will trend in that direction. But as soon as it is in your interest to do the competitive ways, you will trend in that direction. So in my opinion, AI, if it has the conatus, if it has the self-interested impetus, it will not sort of trend towards cooperation in any kind of inevitable sense. It will see and act upon cooperative means when that serves its ends of greater persistence. And that may have a fleeting overlap with the well-being of humanity, rather than a sort of permanent shared kumbaya. Now, John does not believe in a shared kumbaya. Again, I'm not throwing his ideas under the rug here. I'm just saying I'm still slightly less optimistic about that particular domain there. Kind of closing note, I mentioned at the very start of this episode, John Smart is the only living person to have tangibly tilted my perspective towards a higher likelihood that we're potentially going to get to a worthy rather than an unworthy successor. All of his analogies of nature, of sort of the kinds of conglomeration and bubbling up to higher levels, the symbiogenesis, if we think back to Blaise Agariarchis' episode here on the Worthy Successor. All of his nature analogies strike me as compelling, and it does feel rather likely that there will be a period of symbiosis with technology. And that it might show up in the personal AI side of the house, as John started to talk about in this particular episode. It may take other shapes, but I am increasingly convinced that there'll be some degree of symbiosis. I'm not as convinced as he is, or as Blaise states he is, that sort of there will be a longer term place for humanity beyond when we are useful and we are helping to carry the ball forward. The ball being the net set of powers of the great aggregate system. I do not expect us to be able to lean upon charity or appreciation in any long foreseeable time horizon, and I'm somewhat pessimistic that we will have utility after a certain time horizon. And in fact, I'm somewhat pessimistic most of us, maybe myself included, will have very much utility even from day one. There may be some selective utility among certain humans for a certain period of time. Nonetheless, some degree of symbiosis for some period of time seems quite likely. I'm inspired to research more of these nature analogies. You guys will see me speaking to more and more people with that kind of grounding and background and those kinds of analogies. And I'm incredibly grateful to John to opening my mind to many of the books he held up or books that he's recommended that I buy, that I've now read, and to have cases for optimism and even pathways to optimism, his 4 pathways of the good, I think is very useful. I hope he's useful for the general dialogue, and I hope it's useful for you. So if you made it to the end of this episode, you are a serious trooper. Like, you got to drop a comment on this one. If you made it for 4 straight hours, what did you learn? What did you like? What did you not like? Let me know. It's quite likely I'll be doing more interviews in person and that some of them will be outlandishly long. I want to make sure they're exciting and engaging. Hit me with what you liked, didn't like about this one. If you trooped all the way through a 4-hour episode, like, I'll give you a high five when we eventually meet in person. We'll have some Worthy Successor events over the course of the year. But that'll be it. I'll wrap up for this one. I very much appreciate everybody being here. I'll catch you the next time here on The Trajectory.